viral murder video.
Come on, fire!
It was a vivid, graphic video. It changed the debate on the Iraq War, and importantly, it put WikiLeaks on the map when they put it online, and they couldn't be ignored at that point.
And those leaks were just the beginning. They went on to post more than 90,000 leaked documents known as the Afghan war logs, 390,000 documents known as the Iraq war logs, and 250,000 private messages between diplomats called cables in what is now known as Cablegate. These leaks were met with very real ethical questions.
The problem with publishing those cables was that a number of confidential sources for U.S. diplomats who faced real danger when their names were exposed.
Then Secretary of State Hillary Clinton drove the point home that
every country, including the United States, must be able to have candid conversations about the people and nations with whom they deal.
Shortly after Cablegate, the Swedish government issued an arrest warrant for Assange on allegations of rape and molestation. He claimed the allegations were fabricated to get him extradited to the United States, a claim the U.S. government denied. Either way, Assange's next move was
to seek refuge in the Ecuadorian embassy, which really was the beginning of the new chapter in his life and what we're dealing with now, which is him being stuck in London.
What was supposed to be an office in an embassy is now Assange's self-imposed prison to this very day. But that doesn't mean he's slowed down. Since being trapped at the embassy, WikiLeaks has released files about Guantanamo Bay prisoners, Syrian political figures, and the draft to the Trans-Pacific Partnership. And then came the 2016 U.S. election.
Thousands of leaked emails showed Democratic Party officials possibly plotting against Bernie Sanders in his race against Hillary Clinton.
Over the course of 68 days, WikiLeaks released 20,000 confidential Democratic National Committee emails. In terms of the presidential race, if you look right here, when Assange released the first batch of emails, Trump actually takes his first lead against Clinton.
I think we've had enough of the Clintons, in all fairness.
Once WikiLeaks started exposing secrets of the Democratic Party, Julian Assange became a hero to many on the right. Public opinion kind of flip-flopped.
WikiLeaks!
From the emails, we now know Hillary Clinton's campaign manager makes risotto, and also how the DNC squashed Bernie Sanders' campaign. One thing we don't know is who gave Assange the stolen emails in the first place.
Many leading Democrats say they suspect it was the Russians. They released an analysis from a private cybersecurity firm that had said it was the Russians.
But Assange claims
our source is not the Russian government and it is not a state party.
So this is where we stand today. The public still doesn't know who provided the emails to WikiLeaks. Meanwhile, Assange is still running WikiLeaks and still releasing documents. In March 2017, he started publishing documents from the CIA's Center for Cyber Intelligence called Vault 7.
The CIA, the agency charged with finding and keeping our top secrets, can't keep its own secrets.
As long as Assange has a connection to the world, no government secret will be too far from exposure.
Julian Assange is still in the embassy. Maybe he'll leave, maybe he won't.
Order
Regardless,
filled.
his work
Order
has been
canceled.
done. He's changed the way people think about their governments, about their own secrets, about their own hackability, and really the world has changed because of him.
want to expose everything you won't admit.
And action!
This entire video is based on a true story. When I do like motivational speeches or even tell myself like, love yourself and you should love yourself.
This is Lily Singh, but to fans all over the world, she's the YouTube star Superwoman.
What if everyone is a girl, Superwoman? I know we can change the world for the better, one positive day at a time.
My parents now know what I do. They didn't know what I did for a long time in the beginning of my career. I was just making videos in my room. They had no idea.
Mom, Dad, have you seen my keys? I can't find them anywhere. Because you're always on phone.
Until someone called them, like a family member from another part of Canada was like,
Canada.
Is your daughter making videos? And the mom was like, I don't know, Lily, are you making videos?
Just making videos grew into an entire career. Today, Lily's YouTube channel has some 12 million subscribers, over 2 billion views, and guest stars like Michelle Obama, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, and Seth Rogen.
I think a lot of young girls are raised to believe that you're gonna go to school and then graduate and then get married and then get a job and have kids.
And Lily was on that path, all the way through a psychology degree at York University in Toronto. But when she started thinking about a career,
I started to immensely panic and think something was wrong with me because I tried to figure out my life and it wasn't working in that straight line.
It was 2010 and YouTube was only 5 years old.
I thought nothing of YouTube. I was probably the last person in my circle of friends to discover YouTube. And I remember when I did, I thought, this is so strange. There's people making videos in their rooms and other people are watching them.
So she figured, why not give it a shot?
I one day posted a video because I was sad and I wanted to be creative and happy.
She didn't know how to edit video or write scripts, so she winged it.
It was so bad and so cringe, and my expectation was literally nothing. I was like, I'm gonna put this video up, a couple of my friends are gonna watch it, probably make that's gonna be the end of this. The second and third video came from, wait, 70 people watched my first one, can I get 80 to watch the next one?
She kept creating, she kept posting, and the viewers kept coming. Lily had found an audience.
A lot of the comments were, oh my God, there's a brown girl on YouTube.
More specifically, Indian. Lily's parents immigrated to Canada from India, and Lily was born and raised in Scarborough, near Toronto.
My home life was awesome. My parents, even though I portrayed them to be quite strict in my videos.
Oh, Lily, where's the rest of your skirt, huh? I teach you like this, to walk around like this, showing everything to everyone?
They actually aren't like that at all. They're pretty modern and pretty cool.
Your dress is short. Don't know what for.
And were pretty lenient with me. I mean, I got away with a lot of things. I was a brat. I was a brat.
She had a different idea of what she wanted out of life than other kids. In a grade school graduation slideshow, her classmates said they wanted to be lawyers and doctors.
And then I came up and I was like, rapper.
Making out with your friends, man. But then you say that you hate hoes.
I could just feel my parents being like, why?
Because that's just not something women really did in the Singh family.
I know there was a ton of people that weren't happy about my birth being a female, so I think, and that's some real-ish, but it's a real thing. The best thing I could have done to prove to so many people that didn't want my mom to have a daughter was to become Superwoman.
What up, everyone? It's your girl, Superwoman.
It was the name of Lily's favorite hip-hop song by Lil Mo featuring Fabulous.
I love the song so much because it was one of the only songs at the time that was an empowering female song, where Lil Mo's going on about like, I will save guys with my superpowers, and I will save girls with my superpowers, and I am the Superwoman. I thought, this name that I've had for so long that empowered me when I was younger, I'm gonna make this my screen name.
Maybe there should be a new series.
Superwoman didn't just burst onto the scene overnight with a viral video. It was a steady climb fueled by hard work.
The moment that I thought this is going somewhere and this could be a career was the first time I performed internationally. It was in India. And it was the first time where I was truly across the world and people knew my videos.
Singh has transformed herself from a bratty kid to an internet personality to a media mogul. She started a feature film, A Trip to Unicorn Island, in 2016, and her book, How to Be a Boss, hit the New York Times bestseller list in 2017 while she was on a 30-city international tour. Lily started out with the goal of getting millions of subscribers and financial security.
Hurry the hell up!
But after surpassing those goals, success has new meaning.
I've really come to terms with the fact that my definition of success is what's the best legacy I can leave behind. And it's not the number of views, the number of subscribers. It is the number of people that can say, this girl changed my life or changed something in my life positively.
Order submitted. Order submitted. Order filled. Order submitted. Order submitted. Order filled.
CTE is often found in the brains of deceased athletes, military veterans, and others with a history of repetitive brain trauma. Hundreds have donated their brains to the VA Boston University Concussion Legacy Foundation Brain Bank.
This is a former NFL player who died in his early 70s, and this is a veteran who also died in his early 70s.
Dr. Ann McKee dissects these brains.
The hippocampus and the mammillary bodies are very important for memory. I can see that they're slightly affected.
McKee recently dissected the brain of former New England Patriots player Aaron Hernandez, who was convicted of murder and later committed suicide.
You'll see right away that the brain is showing signs of shrinkage. You can see the crevices in the brain that you can't see in the normal.
McKee says Hernandez's severe case of CTE impacted his decision-making, depression, and ability to control rage and aggression. Right now, she thinks we're underestimating how many people have CTE.
We were able to distinguish between CTE and controls and CTE and Alzheimer's disease. The next question is, can we do this in the blood, and can we do this in living people? And we aren't there yet with those answers.
Order submitted.
But the need for a diagnosis in the living is motivating companies such as Quanterix in Lexington, Massachusetts, to work faster on technology that could diagnose concussions and CTE in as few as 30 minutes. Kevin Rosovsky is the CEO.
It's like a high-powered microscope. And so by doing that, we can see little biomarkers that you couldn't see before in the blood.
Quanterix received a grant from the NFL and just went public. Since then, its stock is up more than 40%. The company sells a machine called Simoa for $175,000 to other biotechs, hospitals, and researchers.
And for the first time in history, we're able to see brain health in blood, and that's a major breakthrough, and that's leading to less invasive testing, and we've already been able to see evidence of concussions, and there's the beginning evidence of being able to see the accumulated effect of concussions.
Quanterix is also trying to detect Alzheimer's disease, multiple sclerosis, and ALS. Rosovsky says he thinks diagnosing concussions will be easier than diagnosing CTE.
Diagnosing CT in the living probably is a couple years away. We're real excited to see the progress, but reducing some of that work into actual tests in a laboratory takes time. There's regulatory approvals, there's a lot of red tape that you have to go through.
Also in this race to diagnose CTE in the blood are Athlon Medical and Exosome Sciences. And New York's Mount Sinai Hospital is scanning for the disease in the living. But it's just one step in a series of questions for those with serious head trauma. There's still no cure for CTE.
Even if we had a great idea for a treatment, there's no way to test whether it's effective or not. So that's the enormous advance that we'll get if we can develop a biomarker for this disease.
In Boston, Ann Mostu, Bloomberg News.
Order filled.
Wine is a $300 billion global industry where one person's opinion can make fortunes or break them. That's because of this man, Robert Parker, and his newsletter, The Wine Advocate. For 3 decades, he dominated as the world's most influential wine critic. Now Parker's protege is building an empire of his own. Antonio Galloni runs Venice.
Antonio, tell me, what are you trying to build at Venice?
Well, at Venice, we started with the idea in 2013 of building a world-class platform. We have a database of about 250,000 professionally written reviews. On Delectable, we have 7 million user reviews. Through Delectable, we also have a partnership with Whole Foods and several other partnerships that we can't announce just yet. And when you put that all together, what we have is something that no other company in our space can even come close to.
Do you think of yourself as the next Parker?
Not at all.
Why?
Because Steve Jobs said you can't live your life trying to be somebody else. So he's one of my biggest influences, and I've never wanted to be a replica of somebody else because a replica is never as good as the original. Bob is a genius, fantastic, one of a kind. We're going to be something completely different, and I have no desire to be some version of somebody else.
Different in what way?
Every decision that I've made at this company is completely anathemic to what Bob did with his company. I want our writers to be partners. All of my senior people are locked into the company. They all have equity or they have a path to equity based on business results. That's something that we never had at Parker. Our benefits are world-class, and everything that we've done at Venice is completely different from that model. When Steve Tanzer, who is the most experienced active wine critic in America, wants to work with us, that says something. When Alessandro Masnaghetti, who's the best cartographer of vineyards, wants to work with us, that says something. When Neil Martin, who's a superstar wine critic with enormous experience in Bordeaux and Burgundy and the former lead critic at The Advocate, wants to come and be part of our team, that says something.
You make it sound like the Wine Advocate was a disaster as a company and a miserable experience as an employee.
No, it was great because I got to work with Bob Parker when he was in his prime. You know, and Bob was like a second father to me, and we talked on the phone all the time, and he gave me great advice.
Can anyone's palate dominate the wine criticism business the way Parker's did? And should anyone's palate dominate it the way his did?
I just think the world is very different today. You know, I mean, it's just a totally different world. It's probably not healthy to have a single person dominating the world.
It's not even wine criticism, it's the wine industry.
Yeah, that's probably not the healthiest thing in the world. But I think that there's just such an opportunity right now with social media and technology to reach such a massive number of people that I think it's possible that one or two people will actually have more influence than Bob Parker did, because they will, again, this goes back to your first question, not trying to be a version of somebody else. You see this in sports all the time. It's like, oh, well, nobody will ever beat this record. And then somebody comes along, you know, it's like tennis, Pete Sampras. Nobody's ever going to win as many Grand Slams. Now you have two guys who are ahead of that and one knocking on the door. And so I think a lot like that.
You're a former investment banker. How does that inform and influence what you're doing and what you've done?
My generation has had to deal with a lot more challenges. That's why I think we're actually much better poised for the future. My first job in finance, the first thing that happened was long-term capital, 1998. Then the tech bubble melted down. Then there was a mutual fund trading scandal. You know, that was all like within about 5 or 6 years. And these are the things that I had to deal with as a young executive. My peers who were 20 years older didn't know how to manage in crisis. They'd only seen Black Monday. They'd just been in a big bull market. It's very different. So I'm very lucky. People of my generation or a little bit younger have actually had to deal with a lot more crises. I think that's actually good for learning how to cope with challenges in business.
From the outside, it kind of looks like you're trying to demolish the house that Parker built, right? You left the Wine Advocate.
Yeah.
You merged with one of his chief rivals.
Yeah.
And you just hired his successor, Neil Martin.
Mm-hmm.
So are you?
I think what that says is that all the best people want to work at our company. And that's really what we strive to create starting in 2013. We wanted to create a world-class company that would attract the best-in-class talent, and not just on the content side, on the technology side, on the digital side, our office, and at every level, what we're trying to, we only hire superstars, and we're looking for those superstars.
Order submitted. Order submitted. Order submitted. Order submitted. Order submitted. Order submitted.
In the world of professional wrestling, there's something called a swerve.
Hulk Hogan has betrayed WCW.
Some examples. These tag team partners are called babyfaces, or the good guys. Then one of them swerves when he super kicks his tag team partner in the head, quickly assuming the role of the bad guy, or what the wrestling world calls the heel.
Are you kidding? What a despicable act that was!
Or a match is almost lost when, what's that? The superstar wrestler appears out of nowhere sprinting down the aisle to save the match.
That's the Warriors music! That's the Ultimate Warrior!
That's a swerve. So it should go as no surprise that World Wrestling Entertainment, known as the WWE, the most popular brand of sports entertainment in the world, is prepared for any swerves that come their way. So here's the story of how the WWE learned to see the swerve coming. So I spoke to Bloomberg reporters Felix Gillette.
I'm a writer for Bloomberg News for the global business team.
And Kim Basine.
And I'm the U.S. luxury reporter at Bloomberg.
To find out exactly how the WWE is positioning itself for an all-out global invasion, which starts with a massive change to their lucrative pay-per-view model.
WWE basically pioneered the pay-per-view model on cable. I remember as a kid, when the pay-per-view events came up, all of our friends would scramble around and try and get one of the parents to pay for it.
But in 2014, they took a huge risk.
They saw a little bit sooner than some of the other entertainment brands that where this whole thing was moving was away from cable and satellite television and towards on-demand streaming video apps. They made this risky decision, in essence cannibalizing that pay-per-view model, which they had essentially built.
And after some early turbulence, it's working. Roughly 1.5 million people are paying $9.99 a month for the WWE app, making it the 5th most popular streaming OTT service. This adapt-or-die approach is in the WWE's DNA. Over the past 30 years, the company always seems to think 2 steps ahead. In the early 90s,
WWE was at its most threatened when Ted Turner took them on with WCW,
which stands for World Championship Wrestling. And back then, the WCW was winning the ratings war. So in order to compete with them,
WWE had changed its product from a family-friendly kind of cartoonish style to this really raw. That's why they called their show Raw. It was this raw style of wrestling.
With violent, outrageous, reality-inspired plot lines and aggressive personas.
From a 16-foot ladder!
And they won that fight against Ted Turner, and they bought WCW.
The early 2000s ushered in an era of testosterone-driven programming aimed at the red-blooded American male.
Bra and panties matches, and people smash each other over their head with like barbed wire bats and things like that.
Until 2015, when WWE fans started a hashtag #GiveDivasAChance. Since then, WWE has hired 40 more female wrestlers, and that growing cast of female characters was part of a much larger plan.
They started to try to appeal to a broader set of people.
Let's attract more female fans. And after we've attracted more female fans, let's attract more international fans. They're broadening their base, and they're doing that in large part to make it more advertising friendly.
And not just friendly to advertisers.
They're trying to build up their fan base in China. They're trying to build up their fan base in Europe. They, already have a pretty good fan base in India.
India is a place where they already have an established wrestling culture
because of the gigantic Indian wrestler, the Great Khali. But there's still a lot of work to do. While the WWE set a revenue record in 2017, only 30% of it is coming from an overseas audience. And there's one person whose responsibility is to grow that number.
The buck eventually stops at Vince McMahon, no matter what's happening within WWE.
Yeah, he's a very controlling guy, and it's a very, very, very tightly scripted company.
And that goes all the way down the board to big stars' entrance music.
Order filled.
and their outfits and things like that.
So with a CEO like McMahon
Order
always
submitted.
planning two
Order
moves ahead
submitted.
and an aggressive push into multiple international markets, a big issue is money.
It's hard to do all those things simultaneously without committing a huge amount of capital to it.
And that's where the WWE becomes an attractive company for buyers.
Potentially, one thing that could happen with WWE is they could benefit by being acquired by a bigger technology or telecom company, an Amazon or Facebook or a 21st Century Fox.
So with a market cap of $2.8 billion, the advantage of owning 100% of their own content, and a rapid consolidation spreading throughout the entertainment industry, it looks like the WWE is well positioned, even if there are swerves ahead.
Order filled. Order filled. Order canceled.
Laura, thank you very much for coming here.
Thanks for having me.
I've always been relieved ever since you were appointed, because at least until your appointment, I seem to have the most unpronounceable name. But now so we will keep it as Dara and John. This conference is called The Year Ahead, but in your case, you are close to 6 months into the job. And I wondered what you saw in terms of the year ahead at Uber as your biggest challenge. What's the thing that you think about most when it comes to 2018?
We definitely have our share of challenges at Uber. And for me, where I want to get Uber to the year ahead is a year of normalcy. 2017 was, I think, will go down as one of the most difficult years for any company out there. And I have to give credit to the Uber team and the employees there. It is a group of true believers who believe in our mission, who believe in mobility as a service being available to consumers everywhere.
at a reasonable cost. And what my job in 2018 is to get rid of the distractions and get the company back to business, get the company back to normalcy. There's a lot that we've done in the past 6 months as far as bringing in new investors, driving a new culture.
Order filled. Order submitted.
Doing the right
Order
thing,
submitted.
comes first. Bringing a new management team, et cetera. There's a lot that we've gotten done, but this is a company that knows how to execute. This is a service. Mobility as a service is something that's universal, that's
Order
needed
filled.
in the world. And I just want to get back to doing
It's
business.
quite interesting. You said true believers.
Yep.
Normally, true believers are the last possible people where you're able to change a culture. Can you explain a bit about that?
Well, I think that they understand that mobility as a service, bringing the cost of transportation down, making transportation services available to anyone and everyone on a local basis, and partnering with cities to be a solution to traffic, to pollution, et cetera. That is a mission that they all believe in. And I think that they, having seen what happened in 2017, to some extent the crisis, the enormous crisis that the company has gone through, is a benefit because everybody at the company knows now that we need to change, that we need to break with the past as far as the way the company was run. We need to go from growth at any cost to responsible growth and growth in partnership with other players out there. That's clear, but now I've got to kind of get the company down to the normalcy of execution, of building great technology, and I think we're going to get there. It's still some tough sledding early on, but I absolutely think we're going to get there.
When you talk about execution, is profits one of the things you want to get? I think you lost $4 billion last year.
Well, profits,
peanuts by the standards of
profits would help.
Yes.
So
Order
at
canceled.
some point we
Order
absolutely
canceled.
have to become profitable, and that's part of the
But
plan.
do you have a kind of goal for that? Do you think you should be profitable by 2022 or by 2020?
I think that we'll be profitable before 2022. This is the business itself.
Do you want to come back a bit closer, 2020?
Yeah, listen, it's not going to, I don't want to name a specific year, but this is a business that the core business, the ride-sharing business, can be profitable within 3 years. We will continue to make very aggressive investments in building out autonomy because we think that's a terrific opportunity for building out new technologies such as Uber Elevate, where near-term profitability is not a goal, but long-term growth is. So we will look to balance near-term profitability, but as a company, we will always be a company that makes big, bold bets and takes big risks.
To what extent, though, do you think that drive to become profitable fights against a little bit of this culture change? If you want to make, you talked about making money, but not at all costs. Do those two things?
Well, I don't think that profitability and culture are their issue. It's the company in the past was willing to make trade-offs as it related to how it did business, and I think was guilty of hubris, was guilty of thinking that they knew better than others, and I think that what we know now clearly is that breakneck growth can hide cultural issues, that there are no excuses for not doing the right thing, and that you do have to make trade-offs. And as a management team, we're specifically talking about those trade-offs that you have to make. We have to be a little more patient sometimes because
Order
working
submitted.
with governments,
Order
regulators,
submitted.
et cetera,
Order
sometimes
submitted.
takes longer, but in the end, you build a more lasting business. And so maybe what we went through was necessary, but we're here. We can control our actions from this moment onwards, and I think everyone at Uber from this moment onwards wants to build a great company, not only in terms of growth, but in terms of the kind of company anyone would want to work at.
Can I ask you one thing which you have got a sort of hangover from last year, which is all the regulatory problems, and particularly all the cases against you? I think there are 6 criminal probes or whatever going on.
The lawyers are lining up outside the door.
Which one do you sort of think? Which one do you fear most? I suppose out of these different things.
Listen, I think that all of them are serious issues, and my response is that we're going to be transparent and we're going to take responsibility for our actions in the past. I do think that there are certain circumstances where there was smoke but no fire. And I think as a company, we have to defend ourselves and work within kind of the appropriate frameworks. And my goal is just to get beyond this stuff.
Some of these things like pricing policies, surely they go right to the heart of what Uber is, or am I wrong about that?
Yeah, I think they do, but I think that there's a way of being smart but transparent at the same time, and that's where we've got to take the company.
Take me through governments. When you talk to governments privately, do they talk any differently than they do publicly?
Governments?
Yes, governments.
I think that they are honestly a bit relieved with how we are engaging with them, because I think that the engagement is now real. I think they feel like we're out there, we're genuine because we've learned our lessons of the past, and I do think that we can take, for example, the data that we have in terms of traffic and in terms of movement of our drivers and riders, and we can use that data to partner up with cities in order to solve congestion issues, because congestion doesn't help anyone. It wastes enormous amounts of time for consumers. It hurts the environment. And I think that we are aligned with cities, for example, to partner with them in a fundamental way to solve these problems. And I do think that when these are conversations that a number of regulators and cities have wanted to have with us for many years, and I think we are really engaging with them at a depth that I think is going to create a real win-win going forward.
Do you think you were too confrontational on this before?
Yeah, I do. I think that the company was pushing growth. And listen,
order canceled.
Any innovator, to some extent, you know, the innovation is about questioning past kind of present practices. It's about breaking things, the Facebook breaking things. We just went a step and a half too far. And what I want to keep, hopefully, is the best of both worlds, which is the spirit of innovation, the spirit of can-do, et cetera, but the responsibility of partnership. We don't know better than you. We're actually going to work with you, of actually having dialogue and respect for our city partners, for regulators, and then continuing to take risks and continuing to do daring things. And I think we can accomplish that.
Imagine this audience here is a collection of mayors or a collection of city officials, and you want to depict, this is the Year Ahead conference, depict what the years ahead in this thing are going to be like. How far is driverless cars going to go? You talked just a few days ago about the idea there being flying cars in 10 years' time. Can you just give a description of what you think transport is going to look like?
Well, I think that we think there are three keys to transport and where the industry is going: autonomous, electric, and shared. And I think all three are necessary in order to get to the next level of city planning, et cetera. There are many cities where up to a fifth of the space taken in these cities is taken by parking and storing these cars. And so I do think that you need autonomous, you need electric, and you need shared. And I do think it's going to take some time. True autonomy for every single use case is some ways away. What we bring to bear is our developing autonomy, and we will have autonomous cars on the road, I believe, within the next 18 months, not as a kind of a test case, but as a real case out there. And over a period of time, we're going to bring autonomous transportation and feather it in with the non-autonomous transportation with drivers.
What does feathering in mean?
Feathering in
to a layman like me? Crashing.
Yeah, feathering in means if you're, for example, in Phoenix, and you make a request to go from A to B, which is what you do with Uber, there will be 95% of cases where we may not have everything mapped perfectly, or the weather may not be the right weather, or there may be an accident on the road, or you may not have 2 or 3 ways of getting from A to B, where you may say, you know what, that's not an autonomous use case. We're going to send a driver to pick that person up. For 5% of cases, everything is going to fall into place. And we will send an autonomous car. The user will be able to pick, do you want, there's an autonomous car, yes or no? And we'll be able to service that A for B. That 5% is going to go to 10 and 15 and 20 as our computers and our algorithms learn more and more about what it takes to drive in a city in a real life situation. And every minute of every day, that driver, that computer is going to get better and know Phoenix better and better and better. And in 5 years, we'll have the perfect driver in Phoenix. We will have to retrain that driver in every single city. We're going to have to build out 3D maps of these cities. And it will take time, but over a period of time, you essentially have a driver who becomes the perfect driver. It'll take 10 to 15 years, but that's the feathering in that I'm talking about.
And will a child born today, will they ever need to learn how to drive?
A child born today? No, I don't think so.
So within sort of 20 years from now, we will...
I don't think so. Listen, I hear some groans.
And also,
listen, I heard a couple of groans. 1.3 million people die from car crashes every year. 1.3 million people die from car crashes every year. That doesn't count an estimated 20 to 50 million people that are injured. Okay, this is actually a public safety issue. If you look at cars, 96% of cars, 96% of time, cars are sitting there not being used. It is a huge amount of pollution that's caused by these cars being in the road, and a huge amount of wasted time. So the safety is there. Electrification is absolutely key, and sharing these platforms is going to allow us to be much safer and also put our assets where they add value.
But it's quite interesting because when you first came in, I remember you sounding somewhat more skeptical about self-driving cars. You've been converted. Is that a?
The choir has spoken, and I'm listening. It's pretty exciting technology out there. But again, it will be a hybrid technology for some period of time.
What about flying cars? That came as a slight surprise.
Yes, that's a great project that we're working on. It's called Uber Elevate. And it is actually about battery technology.
It would have helped a lot of people here.
I know. I wish that I was available. We'll launch it here if we can. But battery technology is allowing us to have multiple rotors on planes, or helicopters, if you want to call them that. These rotors that are much smaller will be much quieter than helicopters are. Much quieter, much safer. If you add sharing into the equation, you can actually get the economics of going from A to B. We think within 5 to 7 years to a place where normal people would think about taking these flying cars. That'll be the beginning, and then it's about scaling. And we're working with a number of partners right now.
Do you think the regulation on flying cars, I've heard some proponents of it argue that it might be easier than it has been on driverless cars, because driverless cars you have to deal with existing roads, existing everything. Flying cars, essentially you're going into unconquered space.
I think that mayors that are forward-thinking understand that traffic and pollution are a real issue, and I think flying cars can be a significant solution to traffic issues in cities. And these cars, to start with, they're going to be very specific. They'll be kind of highways in the air. There'll be very specific routes that these flying cars go on. They're not going to be able to take you to your backyard and land in your backyard. There'll be these skyports. So there'll be very specific routes that you go on. And I think if you build a regulatory framework that has that kind of structure around it, I think you get to a better solve.
Can I drag you back somewhat reluctantly back to the real world? But you have Rajiv Misra, who came in with you from SoftBank.
Yes.
He's going to become a director. Last week he said that Uber should focus on repairing its market share in the US and on key European markets rather than going going to new ones. Do you agree with that? Is that the way you look at Uber?
I think one of the fundamental strengths of Uber is the global scope that we have. This is
you had that motto, everywhere. What's it? Everywhere for everyone.
Yeah, everywhere for
everyone.
everyone.
You want to make it some places for some people?
No, we like the everywhere for everyone. It's much sexier than some places for some people. That's
telling me.
Just not interesting. I do think seriously though the global scope that our company brings is important. Our being able to build technology that we can amortize essentially everywhere in the world is hard, but it is part of the fundamental value that we introduce. So I would look at Uber very much as a global brand. That said, we're going to look at all opportunities, but at this point we are leaning forward, and 2018 for us is going to be very much a lean forward year for the company.
But without, I'm not trying to create new boardroom tension at Uber, but that would appear that SoftBank is keener on a more limited idea, whilst you're keener on everywhere for everyone.
Well, listen, SoftBank is a very important shareholder. They're our largest shareholder, and many of our shareholders have opinions over what's the right thing to do. Ultimately, the governance of the company is going to be at the board, and we'll have those discussions at the board, and we'll set our long-term strategy, and then execute on it.
One of the things which Uber played, perhaps not very fortunately, a role in was the whole sexual harassment questions and everything to do with that. I suppose one very obvious question, do you think that you have solved that part of the culture? But secondly, do you think that this time this is a real revolution and it's going to stick?
I think that what was happening at Uber was serious, and I think that while what Uber went through was difficult, I think the Susan Fowler blog was probably one of the best things that happened for Uber, and it certainly started a movement that's an incredibly important movement at the company. I'd be reticent to say that it's solved.
Yeah.
But it's not an endemic issue within the culture of the company, and I think the company has learned, and I think the company took very harsh and appropriate steps to make sure that kind of
Order
behavior
submitted.
is
Order
absolutely
submitted.
clear that
Order
kind of behavior
filled.
is not accepted in any way, shape, or form of the company, regardless of where you are, regardless of if you're a great performer or not.
Order
so
filled.
I think we're at the right place for Uber as a company, but I think in general we're not where we need to be in terms of women in senior positions, making sure that we're welcoming of women in technology, and we help women really build their careers within our company. There's a great kind of bottoms-up energy there, but we're not where we need to be, and we have a lot of work ahead of us.
On the issue of, you talked about the top performers. Is that looking back?
Order filled.
And also, I suppose,
Order
looking forward
cancelled.
for many of the people in this room, because there are a lot of people's businesses which have been affected by this. If you had to give lessons to other people who are now looking at this issue, perhaps more seriously than they have done before, is the really bad issue, and I suppose I'm thinking some ways about the media industry in this, is that giving top performers more room for maneuver or whatever than people, or more discretion than people thought? Is that top performers need to be treated the same as everybody else?
I think they absolutely need to be held accountable. One of the really valuable lessons that I got early in my life was actually through Jack Welch, and he said, it's very tempting to allow top performers to misbehave in any way, but for me, he was talking about being aligned with the CEO. Sometimes you allow top performers. The tendency is, well, let them get away with some kind of behavior that is not the right behavior because they're so good. And what Jack told me very early on is that it's the top performers who are problematic culturally that are the most dangerous, because they have followership within the company, because people look up to them. So he's like the dumb person who is bad culturally. He's not the problem, because everyone says, well, that's a dumb person, so who cares? It's the smart person who has followership. So it is incredibly important for the top performers to actually be held to account more radically than anyone else, because they're the ones who have followership at the company, and they have to set the example. So for me personally, that has absolutely guided how I've managed. Expedia was a company that had, excellent cultural values, and one of the first things we did at Uber was to go out and reset our cultural values, and we call them norms because to me, it's not just these values that you put on the wall and kind of people stare at and you know, it's all nice. It's about behavior. And we set out to change behavior at Uber, and I think that the company was thirsting for it, and we are starting on a path, and I believe it's going to be a positive path.
An inevitable question, I hope you won't regard it as a cheap shot, but you talked about smart people who have followers throughout a company. I mean, Travis would seem to be the epitome of that sort of figure. Is that, do you think of him as being in that category of people that Jack Welch was talking about?
I think, listen, Travis was the CEO of the company, and he had incredible followership, and he was held to account, right? I mean, he's no longer the CEO of the company, and he's a board member. He's a big investor, and so he's absolutely going to play a part on the board. But we've also been very clear as a company that we do have to make a break with the past, with how we behaved as a company. And to some extent with the new CEO being a very different kind of a CEO. So in the end, you have to be held accountable, and I think that Travis was held accountable, and at this point, he's a board member and a constructive one at that.
If you look around the world now, where do you see the next competitors to Uber? You've obviously got Lyft breathing down your neck.
Yes, yes.
Where else do they come from?
Well, I think that as you move into a world of autonomy, the position of the car manufacturers, the position of, for example, Google, who's developing Waymo and Waymo autonomous technology, you're going to get a lot of players interested in this space. And a lot of people think about Uber and ride sharing as a significant enterprise, and it is. But the fact is that we account for less than 1% of miles driven on the road now. When autonomy comes in, that number over the next 10 years is going to be closer, I believe, to 15 to 20%. So, because we're not yet a true alternative to car ownership, and I believe that as you bring autonomous and you bring the price of mobility down and make it available to everybody, everywhere, then we become a real alternative to car ownership, and that really opens up the market for us, but it also opens us up to many more competitors.
Is Google at the forefront of those competitors at the moment?
Google is one of many. I think that they've developed very strong autonomous technology, but what we think, which is exceptional, is having autonomous technology and the network under one roof, which allows us to use autonomous in a very practical way, nearer than you think.
This is Bloomberg Business Week. Insight from the reporters and editors who bring you America's most trusted business magazine. Plus, global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Masser and Jason Kelly on Bloomberg Radio.
Yes, indeed. Live from New York and New Jersey, streaming on YouTube. Jason, I think it is week 7.
Count it. Week 7, Carol. It's amazing.
Right, and ongoing. It is, of course, Monday, April 27, 2020, on this week 7. I'm Carol Masser, along with Jason Kelly. So, okay, week 7 of sheltering in place. We're talking, Jason, and thinking a lot more about returning to work, reopening, stock market definitely moving on that higher. But I guess the big question is, what does it all look like? And are we better on the other side of it?
Well, we're certainly going to be different. I think that much is certain, and we heard from a number of governors already today. We're going to hear from the president later on. And as you say, we're going to talk to our cast of experts in the medical field, in the retail field, and in the investment field about what it looks like on the other side. I did just look, and we'll hear the numbers from Charlie in a second, at my World Equity Index page. Everything across the world green today.
Yeah, right? Because the news is
I don't remember the last time I saw that.
Yeah, that's a really good point in terms of it's broad-based globally in terms of some of the enthusiasm. All right, we're going to cover a lot over the next 4 hours. First up, though, let's get a look at that trading day. Here is Charlie Pellet.
Hi, thank you very much. Again, week 7. Happy Monday to you both. Get me back to the office. Here's what's going on. We've got the Dow, the S&P, Nasdaq at or near best level of the day, with the S&P up 37 right now. That is a gain of 1.3%. We've got the Dow up 301. Higher higher now by 1.3%. Nasdaq up 83. That is a gain of 1%. 10-year, the yield there 0.64%. Gold lower by 1%. 17.11 the ounce. Crude, a major story today. West Texas Intermediate crude plunging 23%. All of this may sound very familiar. WTI down by $3.97 a barrel now. $12.99, trading below $13 on WTI. Financial companies leading the gains today after that surprisingly good earnings report out of Deutsche Bank. Deutsche Bank, the ADRs, now trading higher by 11.9%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That's Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thanks a lot. We'll be checking in with you, of course, throughout the next few hours, taking a close look at those numbers and the headlines that inevitably will come. Carol, it's a big earnings week. You heard Charlie mention Deutsche Bank. And also, we're going to be talking with that cast of experts that you mentioned. Dr. Sandro Galea, the dean of the Boston University School of Public Health. He's going to be back with us. He's got a new book out, very, very timely, Uncomfortable Conversations about the Public's Health. It's called Pained.
Yeah, absolutely. And if anything, well, many things have been laid bare as a result of this crisis, but what has been is those who don't necessarily have access to great health care and how that has maybe prevented them from doing what they needed to during this pandemic. All right, we've got that. We've also got doctor and hedge fund manager Dr. Jun Yoon back with us, president of Palo Alto Investors. Again, kind of that theme about the greater good during this crisis and what can be done. So I'm very curious to pick his brain. He has definitely been working on projects, committing money to it to make things better for our world at large. So I'm curious to see what he has to say about this. And
then the CEO of Joann Stores, well known to many of our listeners, I'm sure, even if you're just driving by it, you've seen it. And closed now, doing some really interesting and important work there on the front line. So looking forward to catching up with Wade Micklon, the CEO over there. Let's set the Business Week agenda in the meantime. Carol, Elena Popino with us, equity markets reporter for Bloomberg. She's on the phone from New York City. Dave Wilson, stocks editor for Bloomberg. He is on a remote line from the great state of New Jersey. Dave, want to start with you. Set the theme for us. We talked about a lot of green, broad-based it feels like. What's the mood in the trade today?
Well, you can see the financial stocks leading the way among the 11 main industry groups in the S&P 500, and that's consistent with the idea that the numbers out of Deutsche Bank are being interpreted as a plus for U.S.-based peers. So Bank of America, Citigroup, J.P. Morgan Chase, Wells Fargo, all up more than 4% at the moment. And then beyond that, I mean, if you look at the biggest gains on the day, it's basically the stocks that have been beaten up the most. Retailers, apparel makers, casinos. I mean, that's sort of the lineup. The only one that really stands out that isn't quite at the top, but certainly has some pretty substantial gains, medical testing companies. Laboratory Corp of America, LabCorp, and also Quest Diagnostics are each up at least 7.5%. Citigroup turning more positive on the industry. I mean, given the need for COVID-19 tests, for one thing.
Right. Think about how much we've heard about testing and tracing, right? That is going to be key in terms of reopening the economy. It's going to become a way of life until we get a vaccine. So that makes a lot of sense. Elena Popina, come on in on our conversation. You've got a story out, really a good read. Mom and Pop are all over the market during the March rout. Mom and Pop have been on the sidelines, I felt like, through much of the run-up in stocks. Tell us what we found out and what we saw.
That's very interesting statistics from major brokerages that report new accounts. That what we heard from E-Trade, TD Ameritrade, and Schwab was that during the first quarter, the number of new accounts that people opened and put their money in rose by the most on record for all three major brokerages. And the biggest part of that advance was in March. It wasn't during January. It wasn't in the first half of February when the market gained to its new all-time high on February 19th. It was in March, which tells us that mom and pop investors, retail investors, non-professionals, they tried to take advantage of the market volatility. You know, for the brave of heart, those who could, were brave enough to withstand all those absolutely crazy price fluctuations.
Right.
That was something. That was quite something. And I don't know if we're going to see that ever again in the lifetime. Those brokerages kept saying in their reports that these numbers were absolutely crazy. They have never seen anything like this.
Well, that word unprecedented gets thrown around a lot because it's true. Unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there. Elena Popina, equity markets reporter for Bloomberg. Dave Wilson, stocks editor. You'll be back with us in just a bit with your chart and stock of the day. We need to go to Virginia now. Governor Ralph Northam giving an update.
In public housing neighborhoods in Richmond. That's part of a pilot project we're doing with local health departments to ensure that people who are vulnerable, such as economically disadvantaged populations, are able to access tests. As part of this project, we're also providing PPE and information about accessing health care. On Wednesday, I've asked Dr. Karen Remley to give you a more comprehensive testing update, but I will, before Wednesday, tell you that I'm just so pleased that she was able to join our team, and as you've heard, our testing per day has almost doubled within the last week, and so I thank her and her team. Now I'd like to talk about our rising concerns for spread in our meat processing plants. Our teams across Virginia, Maryland, and Delaware, and the CDC worked throughout this weekend on this. Here's where we are. Virginia has 10 poultry processing facilities, primarily in the Shenandoah Valley and the Eastern Shore, which is where my home is. Last week, data in the Eastern Shore Health District began to show a rising number of COVID cases among workers at poultry processing facilities in Accomack County. Similar facilities across the Delmarva Peninsula, including Maryland and Delaware, are seeing a similar rise in sick workers. These poultry plants are a vital part of our food supply chain, providing food to millions of people on the East Coast. But the health of the people who work in these plants is also critically important. While the companies here in Virginia are taking additional safety measures inside their facilities to protect their workers and keep the plants operational, I am very concerned about the continued rise in cases. I grew up on the Eastern Shore, and I know it very well. It's a rural area with excellent access to health care, but I know how quickly our medical resources there could be overwhelmed with a surge in cases. The workers in poultry plants are particularly vulnerable. About 3,000 people work in 2 plants on Virginia's Eastern Shore. Many of them do not speak English as their first language, and the close quarters of their housing makes measures such as isolation and quarantine even more difficult. Friday evening, I joined Governor Hogan of Maryland and Governor Carney of Delaware in writing a letter to our president. We're asking the federal government for assistance and for a fully coordinated approach in dealing with this rapidly evolving situation. Because the poultry economy on the Delmarva Peninsula is so interconnected, a coordinated approach is critical. My team worked over the weekend with our partners in these other states and with the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. The CDC has committed to deploying teams on the ground in all 3 states, and we expect a team to be in Virginia today. This team includes epidemiologists and contact tracers, as well as language specialists who speak Haitian Creole, the language spoken by many workers in the Delmarva plants. The CDC team will work with our local health department and VDH. We expect the CDC team to do an overall assessment of the situation and help with wider scale testing to determine the actual scope of the problem. That will allow us to take the most appropriate mitigation steps to contain the outbreak on Virginia's Eastern Shore. These requests are generating results. Yesterday, the CDC released new guidance for meat processing facilities, several of which have begun seeing large-scale outbreaks across the entire nation. Secretary of Agriculture and Forestry Bettina Ring, and Deputy Secretary of Health and Human Resources, Gina Berger, are leading our efforts. We spoke yesterday with corporate leadership from both poultry companies with operations on the shore, and I'd like to thank them for their willingness to cooperate with us and to share needed information. While the situation on Virginia's Eastern Shore is our immediate concern, we are also following developments at the smaller poultry facilities in the Shenandoah Valley as well. Virginia has more than 120 federally inspected meat processing facilities. Our local health departments have been on the ground working with facilities to track cases, increase safety procedures, and recommending mitigation measures. We will ensure that workers are screened, provided care if they are sick, and measures are taken to protect other workers not showing symptoms. Now I would like to talk briefly about vaccinations. We all have heard about global efforts to find a vaccine for COVID-19. A vaccine would mean we could resume our lives, our economies, and our society. It's important to remember how many epidemics we have avoided by having vaccines for other diseases that once killed people, like polio, measles, or tetanus. Today is the start of National Infant Vaccination Week, and I want to take this opportunity to strongly urge parents to keep up their children's vaccination schedule. It's essential to vaccinate young children on time to provide immunity before children may be exposed to potentially life-threatening diseases. Fortunately, most Virginia children are vaccinated on time. However, due to COVID-19, we're starting to see a decline in immunizations. Parents are opting not to take their children to the pediatrician for their vaccines. As a pediatrician, this is very concerning. Vaccinations are a critical protection for children and communities. We don't want to see an outbreak of a preventable disease such as measles on top of the COVID-19 pandemic. I know that healthcare providers around the state are working hard to make sure that children still receive the well visits and immunizations they need. Some pediatricians are scheduling well visits at different times or different locations than sick visits. So please, parents, call your pediatrician or your family practice providers and make sure that your child is getting his or her vaccinations on schedule. While we focus on Virginia's physical health during this epidemic, we know that this is taking a toll.
And you've been listening to Virginia Governor Ralph Northam give an update. And, you know, in the latter part of that conversation, Carol talking a lot about vaccinations, which we've talked about in light of the coronavirus COVID-19 outbreak, but noting, and this is something that will lead right into our next conversation, that all areas of healthcare are being affected by this, and even more run-of-the-mill vaccinations that many parents take their kids to the pediatrician for. You and I are familiar with that, not getting done owing to everything that's going on in the world.
Well, and this is why we've had those conversations, and let's get into it about maybe at some point we're going to have health facilities, hospitals that are COVID-19 hospitals or facilities, and those that aren't, so that people feel comfortable going in for routine visits and updates. Let's bring in Dr. Sandro Galea, Dean of the Boston University School of Public Health. His book is Pained, Uncomfortable Conversations About the Public's Health, which, as Jason and I talked about earlier, is so timely considering some of the things that are being revealed, or once again reminded and revealed in terms of some of the weak points in our society. He's on the phone from Boston. Dr. Galea, nice to have you back with us. You know, it's been a few weeks since we've talked with you. You know, what are your thoughts about where we are, how we're handling it, and what we still need to do, especially for the less fortunate and the more vulnerable populations of our society?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me on. It's always a pleasure to be here. I think as the pandemic proceeds, we are seeing more and more how this exposes fractures in our society. When the pandemic first started, there were a lot of conversation about how the virus does not discriminate, it affects everybody. But it didn't take long for us to realize that the virus does discriminate, that yes, we are all at risk of the virus, but ultimately those who are more at risk are those who are marginalized, who are poor, who are people of color, who live alone, who are single parents, and those who die are those same groups. So what we're seeing is a world where groups that are vulnerable do not even have protections from something as widespread as a pandemic like this. And you're hearing this from data emerging from cities all over the country and really from all over the world. So I certainly hope that this is a wake-up call for us that says, even in the context of a pandemic, we have created conditions where health haves and health have-nots deviate at a time like this.
And Dr. Galea, how did we get here? I mean, how did it get this bad? And was this something that always existed? It feels like it's been exacerbated in the last, call it 10, 20 years.
Yeah, well, when you look at the data, it has been exacerbated probably in the last 30 to 40 years.
Okay.
So about 40 years ago, this is important to note, the American health was among the best of the high-income world. Now, today, we are squarely the worst. We have squarely the worst health of any of our high-income country peers. So we have life expectancy is shorter. We have higher deaths from infectious disease, higher deaths from non-communicable disease, and we leave about 5 years of life expectancy on the table compared to other countries. So, I would ask you and ask anybody listening, we have chosen to leave 5 years behind in life expectancy. And now you may be saying, well, I didn't choose that, but we did. You did and I did, because we have voted for policies that allow that to happen. So it's been about the past 30 to 40 years where our health as a country has been getting progressively worse. And it has brought us to a place where when something like this happens, it reveals this underlying truth. Now, this truth is with us at all times. The virus did not create it. The virus is just exposing it.
And what specifically the policies and maybe the ones that could more easily than others be reversed, what would you point to?
Well, I think we need to really look at this from top to bottom. We would start with the fact that we have a system which ultimately accumulates resources and rewards those who have resources. That starts from our taxation policies all the way to our employment policies, all the way to who gets sick leave, who doesn't, from the state of our education, from the state of our housing. If we really wanted to tackle this, we would say, how do we create a world where everybody has access to high-quality education to allow us to change people's life trajectories, that everybody has access to stable housing, where we have a fair economy such that people who work hard can get jobs that puts them on the right track. And all of that ultimately would add up to creating much better life trajectories for people.
That is so true, because if you think about it, if you get a good education, you'll probably get a good job that also provides you with great benefits or good benefits in terms of health care and other.
Or some benefits.
Or some benefits, right? But we know what amazes me, and Jason and I hosted a quality summit that we did here at Bloomberg, and we were talking about, how this virus is impacting the more vulnerable populations. As you said, healthcare, the problems have been exacerbated. I thought you said 45 to 50 years. It's a long time. Why haven't we been able to figure this out? We have some of the best and brightest minds in this nation, public sector, private sector. We know the problems are there. They've been there for a long time. What's holding us back? Is it private sector? Is it public sector? Where's the problem?
Well, it's a terrific question. I would point to all of us. I think we are holding ourselves back, frankly, because those of us who are in the richest 20%, and that means me, that means you, have been too self-involved. And frankly, the system serves us too well. There really is little incentive to push against the system that ultimately serves those who are dominating the cultural business conversation. And that is all of us. So we need to say, this is a moment in time which has exposed these underlying inequities and which shows us that there is a country of health haves, which is roughly the richest 20%, and health have-nots, which is roughly the poorest 80%, and say that is not the kind of country we want to live in. Now, we do not want to live in that kind of country because that is wrong, and secondly, because if there is another outbreak like this, it threatens us all. So we're beginning to see with this outbreak that if some of us are vulnerable, all of us are vulnerable. And if this is not a wake-up call, a moment in time, I don't know what is.
Yeah, I kind of give up on humanity if it's not.
Yeah.
Truth be told.
Well, let's be optimistic. Let's say that we all see this as a turning point that it should be.
Right. And so, Dr. Galea, let's continue to look through the lens, if we can, of this specific outbreak. And I believe we've talked with you about this a little bit before. I mean, the numbers in the hospitals, so the number of admittances, certainly the number of deaths, I mean, certainly skew much more toward more vulnerable populations as we are at this critical point. Every point seems like a critical point these days, but as we're at this point where we think about reopening and the dangers of a second wave, how do we best protect those who are most vulnerable given the system that we have now?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. I think the way to address that is by sort of breaking the problem apart into its constituent parts. So number one is who gets the virus, right? So we are seeing that minorities, people who are marginalized, are more likely to get infected. Now, why is that? Well, it's simply a function of the fact that it's harder to physically or socially distance if you have to go to work, if you have to ride public transit, if you cannot work from home. All of those are factors that put you in contact with the virus, make you more likely to get it. So that's step one. Now, once you have the virus, the people, again, who are in marginalized groups, disadvantaged groups, are more likely to die. That is probably a reflection of the fact of greater underlying health conditions, greater morbidity underlying. So when you understand that, then the question becomes, how do we deal with those two aspects? Well, I think on the first aspect, we need to make sure as reopening happens that we have a clear risk stratification, that people who are most at risk are most protected. Now, what does that mean? That means saying that if we are doing physical spacing, diffusing physical density, that we particularly respect people who are at higher risk because they have underlying conditions, and that we make sure that we put in place opportunities for people who otherwise would be brought face-to-face with greater risk of transmission to work from home or not to be at work and still get paid for it. Now, all of this is hard, but they represent fundamental changes in employment that we should be making anyway. And we should be using this as a moment to hold ourselves up to a mirror and say, how should we be structuring employment so that it's fair, reasonable, and sustainable for all of us?
When it comes to, as you said, we need to think about destratification, risk destratification, those most at risk. Is this going to become part of our normal society? I mean, are we going to be constantly faced with these types of viruses, Dr. Galea?
It's very hard to say, right? These viruses, in some respects, are not new. What has been new about this one is that it has spread quickly, and also that we were aware of it. I mean, when you look back to, say, the Hong Kong flu, which was about 50 years ago, it was very similar to this one, and it killed more people than COVID is going to kill. That was 50 years ago, let alone, of course, the Great Spanish flu, which was 100 years ago. So it's a question of, to some extent, there's randomness and there's luck in it as to whether or not there will be another virus like this 2 years from now, 5 years from now, or 10 years from now. But the fundamental approach we should take is to say, what should we be doing to mitigate it if there is and when there is another virus? And we should be doing two things, right? Number one is we should make sure that we have public health infrastructure that allows us to rapidly test, contact trace, screen, treat, isolate as needed to contain the spread. So that's number one. Number two is we should be paying attention to these issues we're talking about on this call, which is paying attention to the fact to make sure that we do not have an unhealthy population to begin with, making sure that we do not have a large proportion of people in the population who are essentially sitting ducks for getting really sick when a virus hits and becoming a reservoir of disease for all of us. That's what we should be doing.
All right. We're going to continue this conversation. This is fascinating, and we're going to talk a lot more about that sort of health on the front end when we come back with Dr. Sandro Galea. He is the Dean of the Boston University School of Public Health, also the author of the new book, Pained Uncomfortable Conversations About the Public's Health. Stick with us. More to come.
Yeah, one of our loyal listeners saying, love this guest.
He's great. This is Bloomberg.
Broadcasting live to New York, Bloomberg 1130. To Washington, D.C., Bloomberg 99.1. To Boston, Bloomberg 1061. To San Francisco, Bloomberg 960. To the country, Sirius XM Channel 119. And around the globe, the Bloomberg Business app and BloombergRadio.com. This is Bloomberg Business Week.
Well, coming up, we're going to continue our conversation with Dr. Sandro Galea up at BU. He's got a new book out. We're going to talk a lot about the state of public health, Carol.
Yeah, and I'm curious what he thinks about the role of technology, because we're seeing tech firms step up big time in this crisis. All right, let's get back to your top business stories and a check on that trading day. Hey, Charlie Pellet.
Well, hello there. Happy Monday again to you both. We've got the Dow holding above 24,000, 24,095 at or near best level of the day right now for the Dow, the S&P, and Nasdaq. The Dow up 321 points, up 1.4%. S&P up 38, up by 1.4%. Nasdaq up 84. That is a gain of 1%. The 10-year down 17/30 seconds, yield 0.65%. Stocks climbing alongside global counterparts as major economies edge higher and look toward reopening. Also, policymakers in Japan and Europe sought to reduce pressure on credit markets. France, meanwhile, is reporting the most new coronavirus cases in more than a week, while deaths linked to the virus rose for the first time in 5 days. President Trump will have more to say about reopening the U.S. and the economy in a news conference later this afternoon. We'll have that for you live here on Bloomberg Radio right now. That is scheduled for the 5 o'clock hour. Any changes, we'll let you know. One of the big unknowns, though, in the spread of the coronavirus is what the potential rate of reinfection might be. Dr. Joshua Sharfstein is Vice Dean at the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health.
So I think the current reading is, like with most viral infections, there will be some degree of immunity, particularly for people who experience illness. How much and for how long is not known. And it's also not known which test will really capture that.
The Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health is supported by Michael R. Bloomberg, founder of Bloomberg LP and Bloomberg Philanthropies. Boeing says 52% of shareholders at the company's annual meeting voted to require the company to appoint an independent chairman. In a virtual gathering, CEO David Calhoun also said it will be, quote, years before dividend payments resume. Boeing shares today, right now we do have Boeing up by 0.7%. UPS will be using drones to fill prescriptions for residents of the Villages in Florida, one of the country's biggest retirement communities, amid a lockdown to halt the coronavirus. The time or temperature-sensitive deliveries from a CVS store about a half-mile away are scheduled to begin next week. We've got shares of CVS. They're up now by 2.1%. UPS up by 2.7%. Again, recapping, equities higher across the board. Gold down 1%. West Texas Intermediate crude plunging 23% now, $13.06 a barrel. I'm Charlie Pellet. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. Let's continue our conversation now with Dr. Sandro Galea. He's the Dean of the Boston University School of Public Health, also the author of Pained Uncomfortable Conversations about the Public's Health. And Dr. Galea, I have to ask you, and Carol and I teased this just a minute or so ago, we have heard so much about telemedicine at this point. I was listening to a story on another radio station this morning talking about a huge increase even with GPs of essentially saying, look, you need a checkup, you need this, you need some advice, let's do a consultation over a phone, an app, whatever it is. Is that the new normal? And does it actually work, I guess, is really my basic question.
Yeah, it's a great question. There's no reason to believe that a fair bit of telemedicine will not work. And medicine has been slow in adopting telemedicine approaches on things that you can imagine would work just fine using telemedicine. Now, there haven't been some systematic assessments of some of these approaches, and we have to be careful that we're not jumping wholesale to things that don't work. But the truth is that perhaps from a silver lining point of view, an event like this pushes us to embrace technologies whose time has come. From the point of view of, for example, things like telepsychiatry, telebehavioral health, teleregular checkups, these things you can imagine how they would work, and they would relieve the pressure of having to have physical contact and relieve some of the pressures on health systems. The other side of this is that one of the worries at a moment like this is that because the health system is all so consumed with COVID, or at least with worrying about COVID, is that we are not paying attention to other conditions that should be seen by the health system. So introducing telemedicine, introducing telehealth as a way of making sure that people still get their regular checkups, that people are still talking to physicians, particularly people are still tending to their mental health. This is a real important opportunity to do that.
Yeah. And I do think, I wonder if this moment is really going to kind of get us over the hump of accepting telemedicine. I just think it's amazing. We're doing conferences on air, we're doing broadcasts on air, like so much.
Right.
And yes, it's not the same as being in a studio or next to your partner or your teams, but it's amazing how real it feels and is the next best thing. I think much better than we all anticipated. And hopefully that can apply to the medical community, where I know I work a lot. It's really hard to get to see my doctors, and I have to plan months in advance.
It's hard for you. It's hard for you, and it's hard for me. And there have been many structural barriers to that. I think there's a psychological barrier that doctors who are not used to using telemedicine, but also, for example, payment schedules have not allowed it. Like the Center for Medicaid and Medicare Services just introduced a whole range of billing codes now that are allowed for telebehavioral health, which before physicians would not get paid for doing telebehavioral health. So I think this moment is catalytic. It does allow the introduction of these approaches. But Carol, I think to your point, we should make sure that we recognize that these are never going to be complete substitutes for physical, for real personal interaction. I mean, they're complements, but they're not substitutes.
Well, and so having said that, and I was thinking about this when we first started talking, and Jason and I talked so much about wellness and this whole idea of, we really need to rethink, and I know we're pushing towards that, the medical community, to be about keeping you well. And I think if you're doing that, going to your doctor, staying well, that would be an also important thing to kind of move all of this forward.
It is, and I like the use of the word well. Of course, I like it because the title of my previous book was called Well, and but the reason I did that is because I do think that ultimately that is the definition of health we should be going for. It is for the complete absence of physical and mental disease, so that people can go on and do and achieve in their life what they want to achieve. Health should ultimately be a means, not an end. It's a means to people living their full lives and living towards fulfilling their aspirations. So what we really should be doing, to go back to our earlier conversation, is creating the kind of world that generates health so that all of us on this call, everybody listening, can then get on with their lives and live their lives the way they want to.
Yeah, well, definitely words to live by for sure. And we, I think, are all thinking more and more about our wellness, our general health, and hopefully that will be one of the things that is a residual effect and catalytic, as you say, Dr. Galea, in terms of moving us forward. All right, Dr. Sandro Galea, great to have you back with us, the Dean of the Boston University School of Public Health, also the author of a new book, Pained Uncomfortable Conversations About the Public's Health. I feel like we're having a lot of those these days. Maybe not uncomfortable, but certainly thoughtful.
Yeah.
And we certainly appreciate his time. It's a very, very busy time for anybody in the medical profession. We know that.
Yeah, totally. And I love these big, broad conversations, too, about thinking, how can we do it better? And I think you're hearing a lot more, especially from the private sector, from the medical community. And I really do hope we continue those conversations and not only just talk, but actually make these changes. All right, let's get back to World and National News headlines. For that, we turn things over to Bob Moon. Hi, Bob.
Hi, Carol. Governors and mayors of both political parties say the next federal rescue package must include aid for states and cities or risk a prolonged recession. Bloomberg's Martin DeCaro reports.
Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell's suggestion that states should declare bankruptcy rather than be bailed out by Congress is rankling state leaders who point out Congress did not hesitate to provide relief to private businesses. Maryland's Republican Governor Larry Hogan, the head of the National Governors Association, on ABC's This Week, says McConnell may regret his remarks.
I think it just slipped out, but I'm hopeful that we will be able to convince Senator McConnell to go along with the bipartisan bill in the Senate.
House Speaker Nancy Pelosi is on board, but many Republican lawmakers are not, even as states lose billions in tax revenue. In Washington, Martin DeCaro, Bloomberg Radio.
The picture is changing again at the nation's airports in a sign that more passengers are beginning to fly again. Some anxiety-inducing videos circulated over the weekend showing nearly full flights. In one case, a nervous traveler said it appeared American Airlines canceled at least one flight and added those people to another to intentionally fly more passengers on a single flight, which brings this new challenge. How do you stay away from people when you're stuffed into a plane with them? The airlines aren't being real specific with reassurances that they're keeping a close eye on seat assignments to keep them well separated and are giving people more leeway to move around. Still, not everyone appears to be satisfied with leaving their safety up to the carriers. Some passengers wore masks, some didn't, and not all the middle seats were empty. And at least 2 passengers in one video appeared to be wearing bulky hazmat-style suits. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. I'm Bob Moon.
Bob, thank you. You are listening to Bloomberg Business Week. Jason Kelly, Carol Masser here with you on a Monday afternoon. And this is one of these stories we keep coming back to because we are talking about it all the time. I live in the burbs. You live a little closer in to the city in a much more urban environment. And the question becomes, are people going to continue to be excited about living in New York City?
Well, it's funny because I tweeted out, I was having a conversation on Twitter about, people wondering, especially with working from home, will there be kind of a mass exodus with more telecommuting? And I don't know. I said, we've had conversations like this after 9/11 and other crises, and people have come increasingly back to the cities, young and old. It's funny, though, over the weekend, one of my daughter's friends lives not too far, but in a much more densely situation here in Jersey City, but a little bit more dense. And they, I think, are renting a house in the suburbs. They got out just before the lockdown and we're just like, we're getting away from this area. But they're in a tall apartment building, really tall. And I think they were concerned about elevators and just, not being able to escape from people. So this story talks about specifically a moving company. And I guess his storage business is booming because people are fleeing. And I guess before even figuring out where they want to go, they're kind of packing up their stuff, storing it away, and trying to figure out their next step.
Well, I also think it's interesting to think about, not just are people leaving, but on the other side of this, do people not show up? Does it become less of a place where people say, okay, I got to get to New York for a few years, or I want to live in New York, or in the case of you, and you alluded to this, I'm an empty nester and I'm going to go back to the city. It'll be interesting to see. I think this is a 10-year question in many ways.
Yeah, I think it's a longer perspective, and we'll have to see how things play out. And I think so much of this is contingent on when we start to come back. Are people safe? Do they feel comfortable about it and how it manages? If we get a second wave, I think all bets are off in terms of how people move forward. But again, time will tell on this, and I'm going to be optimistic that things get more back to normal, if you will.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. Stocks here today holding near their highs of the day as major economies edge toward reopening. Also, policymakers in Japan and Europe seek to reduce pressure on credit markets. S&P 500 index poised for a 6-week high as financial companies lead gains after a surprisingly good earnings report from Deutsche Bank. Shares of Deutsche Bank, the American depository receipts, they are advancing now by 12.4%. Other financials gaining as well. JP Morgan Chase up 4.3%. Citigroup up 7.7%. Bank of America up 5.2%. Wells Fargo up by 5.5%. 10-year yield 0.65%. Gold is down 1% right now, 17.11 the ounce. West Texas Intermediate crude plunged 23%, 13.03 a barrel. S&P up 42, up 1.5%. Again, the Dow close to the high of the day, up 350 now, up 1.5%. Nasdaq up 98. That is a gain of 1.1%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. You are listening to Bloomberg Business Week. And Carol Masser, one interesting thing I was just looking at, we're going to get a lot of tech earnings this week. Obviously, one of the biggest tech earnings weeks we've ever had. Nasdaq only down about 2.6% for the year.
Isn't that amazing?
Incredible.
Like, if you think about the swings that we've had, how quickly they've happened, that's just wild.
And speaking of a tech world, I learned a new term from this story that we're about to talk about. ACG.
You're so
cool. Did you see that?
No.
Anime,
of course I did.
Comics, and games. Did you know that? Did you know ACG?
I did not know that before I read this.
All right. Well,
so let's
Joel
get
Weber
into
knew it. Yeah, Joel Weber knew it. He's the editor of Bloomberg Business Week. He joins us on the phone from Brooklyn. And Molly Schutz, she is U.S. technology editor for Bloomberg. She edited this story, joining us on the phone from New York City. It's about a Chinese video site serving teens, but not just ACG, as they say, but there's another element to this. Joel, tell us about it.
Well, ACG kind of looks like the future to me, and it's definitely what the kids are into. And when we found out about this, Bilibili is the name of this Chinese site. The thing that really came across wasn't just like the ACG stuff, but it was the sort of the nationalism and maybe some propaganda that came along with it as well. Molly, what did we discover?
Right. We discovered that, so this site Bilibili, like you said, has been around for about 10 years, and it attracts all the most popular demographic, the Gen Z demographic. And they're on there looking for the latest Japanese manga clips or maybe Grand Theft Auto. And now these days what we're seeing is that increasingly they're able to get a little bit of some Communist Youth League clips in there as well.
So tell us a little bit about, too, how people use it. I mean, this is a pretty active platform, right? So when somebody posts something, I mean, there's a lot of engagement.
Right. It's a platform, like we said, it started out mostly for ACG, and now it's morphed more to be like a YouTube site. They have a broad range of entertainment. It's news, it's entertainment, it's chatting. Young people go on there for what you would expect. They want to be entertained. They want to maybe find out about a little bit about what's going on. But for the most part, they haven't been on there, for school or for necessarily an education or hardcore news. But increasingly, that's, in a sneaky kind of way, it's how it's turning.
And go ahead.
Well, and I was going to say, it's very also political, and some of the things that it puts out there on the platform from different groups is pretty provocative.
Right. They're that one of the things that they had on there last year was a series depicting the life of German socialist philosopher Karl Marx. His theories are widely taught in Chinese schools, and so they put this clip on there. It was a clip produced exclusively for the platform by several state institutions, including the provincial propaganda department, and it shows a young Karl Marx dressed up or and portrayed as a typical Japanese manga-style protagonist. So this really gets
kids where they're interested, which is in the manga, and then it's feeding them a little bit of the theories that they want to get across, the philosophies and the teachings that they want to get across. Another example, they had a show that depicted a little rabbit hunkering down. It was using cartoons and a cute little rabbit to depict, the political and events of war. So these are some of the kinds of ideas that they're putting in there in an animated way or in a storytelling way, but that are really sending a message.
So Molly, obviously a platform like this right now during the coronavirus pandemic is sort of, you've got captive audience to some extent. So what kind of revenue is this platform been seeing, and how is it faring of late?
Right there. So what they've found is that, it's good business, this propaganda. They recently had their earnings that they reported, and they reported just a little bit more than 2 billion yuan, or $282 million in revenue for their fourth quarter. That was up 74% from a year earlier. And most of that came from mobile game-related sales. So that came first, and then some live streaming and advertising. But most of these, you're really seeing that the more they engage people on the site, that it's bringing in the revenue. They had an example too of a New Year's Eve show that they live streamed, and that attracted huge audience and huge viewership. I think more than 80 million simultaneous viewers. They had an orchestra playing Harry Potter music, but also a chorus of soldiers singing patriotic themes about fighting off Japanese invaders during World War II.
So the platform that's coming to mind, Molly, when you kind of talk about this a little bit, but just obviously also captivated a ton of the youth is TikTok, right?
Yeah.
So how do these two platforms how do they compare from a user standpoint, but also B, from a monetization standpoint?
I think, from what I understand, I think TikTok is going to be a little bit more interactive. It's going to be on TikTok you can go and you can make your own video. It's really creative. You can do short clips. You can do long clips with yourself or other people. You can use content that's out there, create your own. This site is more, it's less, I think, the way I understand it, about creating your own new content rather than consuming content that other people can post up there. So I think that's a little bit more the difference. This one they compare to a little bit more like a YouTube style channel, as opposed to a TikTok type channel.
With that side of propaganda, of course.
Right.
Yeah, with the healthy side, healthy side of propaganda. No, it's fascinating to think about. I mean, especially because we know that certain trends start to gain momentum. I mean, TikTok is a great example. Gain momentum in China, and then they make their way to the United States, and it all sort of builds from there.
And I think about it at a time where we really need global cooperation on something like this, just coming off the virus. We're going to need it economically, and yet I feel like we consistently have these platforms that just create disconnects and division, and I don't think that's a good thing.
All right. Our thanks to Molly Schutz, U.S. Technology Editor for Bloomberg News, joining us on the phone from New York City. And, of course, Joel Weber, the editor of Bloomberg Business Week, joining us on the phone from Brooklyn. Carol?
All right. For those of you listening in New York, D.C., and San Francisco, and watching on YouTube, Bloomberg Business Week with Jason and myself, we're going to continue. If you're listening on Bloomberg 106.1 in Boston, Bay State Business is coming up next. And coming up next on Bloomberg Business Week, we're going to check in on the bond market and the economic news. Keep in mind, we've got a Fed meeting, right, Jason, coming our way on Wednesday. I am curious to see what happens in an environment where, rates are about as low as they can go, but certainly we can have negative rates. So we'll see where that goes and also see what other kind of stimulus programs were needed. And then an interesting conversation with Andy Brown about Wuhan, which we know was the cover story of the magazine last week, but curious to see what Andy has to say.
Yeah, can't wait. He's right there on the front lines. Wuhan, it's on top of everybody's mind. This is Bloomberg.
Order submitted. Order submitted.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. We move into the final hour of trading. We've got the Dow, the S&P, and Nasdaq all advancing. S&P 500 index up now by 42 points, up 1.5%. The Dow also up by 1.5%, up 361 points now, holding above 24,000 at 24,136 again. Best level of the day. We've got Nasdaq up 98 for the Nasdaq Composite Index. That is a gain right now of just about 1.1%. So stocks are climbing as major economies edge toward reopening and policymakers in Japan and Europe seek to reduce pressure on credit markets. The dollar weakened, oil taking another dive this Monday. West Texas Intermediate crude plunging 23%, down $3.92 a barrel, now at $13.01. As for the economic data and the market outlook, Laura Rame is chief economist at FS Investments.
This focus, I think, has been so extreme on the downside. Markets are actually looking ahead to what's coming in the reboot. And I just think that even though we're going to get this ghastly, really epically bad data this week, markets may ignore it and look ahead to what they see as a positive of getting back to work.
And right now we've got the 10-year down 17.30 seconds with a yield of 0.65%. Gold down 1%, 17.13 the ounce. General Motors has suspended its dividend and the share buyback program that activist investors fought for in the last half-decade as the largest American automaker seeks to preserve cash in the midst of the pandemic, shutting down much of the global car industry. General Motors shares, they're up today by 1.6%. And Apple is reportedly pushing back the production ramp-up of 4 new iPhone models by about a month. This according to Dow Jones, citing sources. Apple shares today, right now we do have Apple lower by just about 0.1%. So again, recapping, equity markets higher across the board. Nasdaq up 99 points. That is a gain of 1.1%. S&P up 44, up 1.5%. Dow Jones Industrial Average now up by 373 points, up by 1.6%. I'm Charlie Pellet, and that's a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. Let's head out to California now. Governor Gavin Newsom giving an update.
However, that's driven by data. It's driven by behavior. And as we change our behavior, we can impact the science, the health, and the data. This virus doesn't take the weekends off. This virus doesn't go home because it's a beautiful sunny day around our coasts. The likelihood of having a virus-free world is not realistic in the next number of months. We'll look forward to that day as herd immunity comes into effect and we have a vaccine that we can distribute and make available to hundreds of millions of people across this country, billions around the rest of the globe. Until then, we have to manage it. We have to manage risks. We have to manage and augment our behavior. And that's why I cannot impress upon you more to those Californians watching that we can't see the images like we saw, particularly on Saturday in Newport Beach and elsewhere in the state of California. Look, I'm not naive. The overwhelming majority of our coastline was appropriately advanced, meaning the stay-at-home orders were advanced, the physical distancing, the social distancing on those beaches was appropriate. You didn't see those images in LA beaches and San Diego beaches and Northern California around San Mateo County, up further north towards Eureka, because we had strong guidelines that were not only adopted, but were abided by. And we had local partners that supported those efforts and helped create the conditions on those hard park closures that allowed people to continue to conduct themselves appropriately. Unfortunately, there were these exceptions on Saturday in particular, a little less so on Sunday, and we've got to confront that. And I'm encouraged. I want to acknowledge that Newport Beach. I want to acknowledge their city council. I want to acknowledge the County Board of Supervisors in Orange County. I'm told they are looking to consider some augmentations and some more deliberative engagement to address the conditions and those concerns that were highlighted over the course of the weekend. But I want folks to know this as well. We're doing the same at the state level. The California Highway Patrol with our State Parks Patrol with other partners, and we will avail ourselves to more aggressive enforcement of the stay-at-home order, of the social distancing, of the guidelines and procedures that we expect to be followed all across the state of California. I deeply respect localism. I deeply respect local decision-making. I deeply respect the work that elected officials do all up and down the state of all political stripes. And I recognize your anxiety, and I recognize the pressures. As a former county supervisor, as a former mayor, I understand those local pressures intimately. And I deeply understand the broader public's sentiment about their need to get some clarity, get some confidence that we'll go back to whatever modified sense of normalcy that we hope to see, that we'll see that advanced sooner than later. But I cannot impress upon people more. The only thing that will set us back is our behavior. The only thing that will set us back is people stopping to practice physical distancing and appropriate social distancing. That's the only thing that's going to slow down our ability to reopen this economy, our ability to adapt and modify this stay-at-home order. As I said, weeks, not months. If the data continues to be as stable as it has been over the course of the last few weeks, the only thing that can stop that is more images, again, like we saw over this weekend. So I'm looking forward to working with those local government agencies, working much more aggressively on the enforcement side, and continue to believe that we have remarkable capacity in the state to stabilize this curve and make the kind of modifications that all of us are eager to make. Again, none more eager than I am. And I just want to extend to that point. Tomorrow, we will be laying out more detail. Last week, on Wednesday, we laid out details on one of our 6 indicators. That was on the issues of testing, on tracing, on tracking, on social isolation that is done with an economic justice framework and the issues around quarantine. Tomorrow, we're going to break down the number 5 indicator, which goes to our business environment, goes to schools and child care facilities and the like. And again, the hope and expectation is that we'll be in a position in a number of weeks to make meaningful modifications. But again, the data will guide that. The indicators will guide that. And the only thing that can disrupt that, to set us back, to slow down our capacity to start to reopen our economy, is behavior that's inconsistent with the statewide guidelines. So I just want to make that clear up top. And again, just want to thank all the incredible work that was done over the weekend by parks and by our public partners and by large cities that really conducted themselves appropriately and truly did justice to the guidelines that not only they set locally, but that the state of California has set. And we'll have a little work to do to improve upon Saturday in particular, but I'm confident that we can do so. And again, look forward to robust conversations this week in that respect.
All right, you've been listening to California Governor Gavin Newsom, his daily update on the virus, and specifically saying that just weeks, not months away from changing orders in terms of reopening the economy. But you can see his distress, Jason, over the weekend in places like Newport Beach and other beaches outside of Los Angeles, specifically, he was noting, where people were out and about, and his concerns are how that can lead to a resurgence in the virus, and as a result, will slow the reopening that he's hoping to do. And he's, continuing to think about the specifics and how we get to that reopening. But if the numbers start to go up again, you can't do that.
Have you seen the pictures of Newport Beach?
I saw some pictures over the weekend. Nuts, right?
It's nuts. I mean, it is absolutely nuts. It looks like
nothing's
a
wrong.
Typical summer day, people packed in together, and there was a heat wave. I get it. The beaches are beautiful. And yet, we've all experienced this, I think, either through pictures or in person. There's a big, beautiful state park very close to where I live, and the cars were parked, lined up on streets, folks getting in, and maybe they were practicing social distance once they were in there. And yet you just worry, given everything that we've heard about these big gatherings of people.
Well, I have to say, we went out for a drive on Saturday, got in the car, and I really thought twice about doing it. And then once we got on, my daughter's like, it's like nothing's wrong. Like people were out on the streets Saturday, just out and about. I will say, predominantly everybody had a mask on, but still there were a lot of people out, and it really surprised us.
Yeah, no. So certainly something to watch, especially as we seem to be at this critical moment on the curve. So we'll continue to watch that, and we'll continue to bring you the comments from various governors around the country, especially here in the tri-state area, where a lot of big decisions being made. A lot of big decisions going to be made later this week. A lot of comments made by the Federal Reserve. Let's understand the world of economics right now. Let's go to Kathleen Hayes, Global Economics and Policy Editor for Bloomberg. Joining us on the phone from the Poconos, Yelena Shaletyeva. She is Senior U.S. Economist for Bloomberg Economics. She joins us on the phone from Long Island. So, KH, Jay Powell, we're going to hear from him. Exciting.
We sure are. We're going to get their policy decision. They've been meeting a lot and doing a lot of things, but kind of just the regularly scheduled meetings have been sort of an afterthought, right? I mean, things were so dire when when the virus started getting worse, and people were wondering what was happening, and the Treasury market was going crazy. So now we have a regularly scheduled meeting, but they've already they've already set up all these special lending programs. They have already taken the key rate down to about 0. So I'm glad you mentioned Jay Powell in the press conference, because no matter what the policy statement says, it seems likely this is going to be the main stage when Jay Powell gets asked questions by reporters about the economy, about could they do more, about would they go to negative rates, about oil's selling off, all these different questions. And I think probably a lot of good questions about the programs themselves. And, was it a good idea to start getting into the corporate bond market, things like that. But, yeah, it's a big deal, but probably not because of any big changes or announcements in terms of programs or the economy, more about what people can dig out of him when he has to face the nation.
Before we got into this and before we heard from the California governor, Charlie Pellet did a news update, and Lara Rain was one of the economists who, a quote from her, and she said, we're getting ready for an epically bad data set this week. So, Yelena, how will that at all kind of affect the tone and tenor of what we hear from Jay Powell and company?
First of all, I agree with all the above that Kathleen said about the press conference. That will be front and center of the policy meeting this week. So the statement will obviously acknowledge that, a record steep decline in economic activity is underway, and, the Fed is doing anything they can to kind of provide a cushion for that. But I agree, a lot of questions will be in terms of what happens next, whether negative rates are possible in the United States. And on that front, we firmly would like to reiterate that policymakers will say absolutely not. It's not one of the tools under their belt. Rather, they will probably extend existing lending facilities, not in a sense that they will introduce the new ones, but rather they will probably extend the existing ones and perhaps go more in terms of a risk tolerance of current programs. They will also probably be asked about other tools they might have. And I am personally interested in something that was quite widely discussed even before the crisis, such as yield curve controls and perhaps any other measures they might be considering. So, and in terms of a potential rebound and but unwinding the measures that they have already introduced. So what will be the timing of those further steps? That is also possible in terms of questions, I believe.
Yeah, and I would expect that the Fed and Jay Powell will be very transparent, because that's what the market and investors need. All right, guys, thank you so much. Kathleen Hayes, Global Economics and Policy Editor at Bloomberg News, along with Yelena Shaletyeva, our Senior U.S. Economist, Bloomberg Economics. They will be following all of this throughout the week, Jason.
All right, and we know he's following all the business headlines for the day. That's Charlie Pellet. Let's head over to him for an update.
And here's what's going on, Jason Kelly. 46 minutes to go ahead of the closing bell. We're higher across the board here. The Dow up almost 2,400 points right now, up 1.7% at 24,170. Stay with Bloomberg right through the closing bell to see if the Dow holds above 24,000. We've got the S&P up 45 now, 2882. That is a gain of 1.6%. Nasdaq higher by 100 points, up by 1.1%. Bottom line, stocks climbing as major economies edge toward reopening. We've got the 10-year now 0.65%, down 19.30 seconds. Gold lower by 0.8%, 17.14 the ounce. And West Texas Intermediate crude plunging 22%. All sounds very familiar. WTI now at 13.06 a barrel. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. Well, Jason, we know the cover story of Business Week magazine last week was all about the reopening of the Chinese city where the virus first started Wuhan. Also writing about Wuhan this week on the Bloomberg New Economy editorial director Andy Brown, who reminds us that when it comes to understanding the virus, Wuhan was the past. It is also the future. Andy joins us on the phone in New Hampshire. By the way, in a conversation, it was picked up by major media outlets around the globe. Last week, in a Bloomberg New Economy series, Andy hosted a conversation virtually with the Chinese ambassador and Australian prime minister. So hopefully we can get into that. They talked about U.S.-China decoupling. Andy, great to have you back with us. Wuhan, let's talk about that because we all are really watching that city very closely.
Right. So this is the epicenter, or was the original epicenter of the, COVID-19 epidemic, which turned into a pandemic, and the city has reopened after a fashion, and it's right now Wuhan is a lesson to the world about how you go about reopening. And there's this sort of easy feeling in the West, in the United States and Europe, that somehow you sort of flip a switch and you go back to life as it was before. And the lesson from Wuhan is that that's just a fantasy. It's a dream. Life in Wuhan is grim. It's a facsimile of life. The sacrifices and the costs of reopening that city are very high, and it means accepting, in Wuhan's case, a degree of intrusion of the state into individual life, which is just unthinkable, in the United States or other democracies. And it's not just Wuhan. It's the experience generally in East Asia opening up is similar. So, Hong Kong, you've got these electronic monitoring bracelets. Taiwan will monitor your cell phone if you're in quarantine. South Korea, will publish vast amounts of data about individuals who are suspected of carrying the virus or who have it, and will publish this nationally in a way which would be, sort of outrageous to countries in the West. I guess, our story, it was a very good story out of Wuhan, is just sort of it's a kind of a wake-up call. It's saying, you really need to think about what are the consequences and what sacrifices are you ready to make in order to go back to some version of normal life.
Well, because, Andy, it's such an important distinction, too, because I feel like we've gotten our head around, as best we can, inconvenience, right? That like life is going to be different, and maybe we have to wear a mask, or maybe we can't go to certain places, or maybe it's going to be a while before we get to do certain things. But there is a big difference, a big distinction between inconvenience and, as you say, intrusion. You know the world very well. You just gave some really good examples. What's your sense of how Americans and Europeans will deal with some of these measures that you've described?
I don't know. I mean, it's perhaps there is a halfway house. Perhaps there is a sort of an opening light, or a sort of a less intrusive way of reopening safely. But I guess the question is that this needs to be there needs to be a debate. I mean, people need to decide what they're ready to accept, the restrictions and the intrusions that they're ready to accept, and where the guardrails are, where the red lines are. And I'm just not seeing that debate.
Right.
but also this sort of just the tenor, the quality of life that I'm not sure people. Our reporting was very vivid out of Wuhan. Our reporters went through factories and discovered these sort of silent, sort of dystopian places where workers are not allowed to talk to each other when they're having lunch in case they inadvertently sort of spread the virus. And the elevators are closed, and the workers have got to walk upstairs. And constant vigilance, sort of hyper awareness of the danger. This sort of, it's this specter of disease that shadows everybody. So you can go to a Starbucks in Wuhan, but if you sit there, you're going to be told by security guards, keep your distance, and they're going to tell you to readjust your face masks after you've taken a sip of coffee, and that's after you've. Everybody in China is color coded, right? I mean, so you've got a COVID-19 status. It's green, it's yellow, or it's red. And there's a QR code, there's a barcode for this. You swipe in. So, this is having swiped into to Starbucks, having revealed your COVID-19 status, you're still treated, as though you're sort of in some kind of a lockup.
Andy, and I think more so than ever before, we need global cooperation. And I do want to touch on your Bloomberg New Economy conversation that you had, I think, over the past week, and just, how that lack of cooperation, global cooperation, is going to prevent the world from healing on so many different levels. And I do wonder, in a society or in Eastern Asia where you can more easily force people to do stuff versus the United States, where everybody is, wait, I have rights to do whatever I want, whether that holds back the Western economies from coming back from this.
For sure. So, I mean, the experience, the historical experience, of course, in disasters is that the United States has taken the lead precisely in order to coordinate this kind of global response. And it signally failed to do so this time. China has this was one of the conclusions of our panel, China has kind of disqualified itself from this role because of the way that it botched the early, there was the cover-up in Wuhan and so on, and then this attempt to use medical diplomacy as an instrument of propaganda. And people don't really trust the numbers coming out of China. So, China hasn't come out of this as a global leader. The conclusion really was that if there is going to be global cooperation, and it is, as you say, utterly and absolutely essential. I mean, people need to get together to figure out therapies and ultimately a vaccine. But if we're going to get that kind of cooperation, it will occur in the absence of leadership from China and the United States. So, Kevin Rudd, the former Australian Prime Minister, has this idea for, I think he calls it a group of M7, a grouping of countries, including a number of countries in Europe, but specifically not including the U.S. and China. And he's proposing that these countries form an alternative committee to save the world, in effect.
That is incredible. And meanwhile, the relations just bilaterally between the U.S. and China feel like they continue to worsen and show no signs of getting any better. And that seemed to be a conclusion of your panel too, Andy.
Right. So there was this sort of hopeful idea that somehow or other, in the face of this existential threat, the United States and China might be able to at least temporarily bury their differences and work together on a cure, on a vaccine, and that doesn't seem to have happened. The Chinese ambassador, Cui Tiankai, he said, look, we have to re-examine the whole fundamentals of this relationship. There was a general acceptance around at the table of our panel that the relationship has now completely collapsed. And it's bipartisan in the U.S., of course, on the Democrat and the Republican side, with both Trump and seemingly Joe Biden competing with each other now to be tough on China.
To like China less, yeah.
It's amazing.
It is
and
pretty
upsetting.
incredible. But as you say, there was that ray of hope, and I read something earlier this afternoon that was talking about how there seemed to be something of a truce between President Xi and President Trump, and that very quickly broke down at that level, at the highest level, but also at the level underneath both of those leaders. Andy Brown, thank you so much, editorial director of Bloomberg New Economy, on the phone from New Hampshire. I want to bring you a quick headline toward the end of that, or still in that update from California Governor Gavin Newsom. California reporting 45 virus deaths. That's down from 100 plus, I believe an average of 100 plus last week at daily deaths. So that's good.
That's good.
Good
That
news.
is positive. Fingers crossed that we continue those numbers, although, as we heard from Governor Newsom, he's a little concerned about some of those images that he saw over the weekend at Newport Beach of people next to one another doing their things like nothing was wrong. All right, you're listening to Bloomberg Business Week, and this is Bloomberg Radio.
Live to New York, Bloomberg 1130. To Washington, D.C., Bloomberg 99.1. To Boston, Bloomberg 1061. To San Francisco, Bloomberg 960. To the country, Sirius XM Channel 119. And around the globe, the Bloomberg Business app and BloombergRadio.com. This is Bloomberg Business Week.
Saw those neck rolls.
Yep. Just getting psyched up for the chart of the day. It's all happening.
Yes, it is. I'm excited to see how he's kicking off the week.
He's getting in game shape for Dave Wilson. Got to guess that song. Got to talk about the chart. Got to guess the close of trading.
Pressure's on.
It's all happening.
All right, let's get a check on your top business stories and an update on the trading day. We've got just about 29 minutes to go, Charlie Pellet.
Indeed, we've got stocks higher across the board with the Dow Jones Industrial Average holding above 24,000 right now. 24,172, up almost 400 points. A gain right now of 1.7% for the Dow, up 399 as I speak. We've got the S&P up 46 at 2883, higher by 1.6%. Nasdaq up 106, that is a gain of 1.2%. Stocks advancing as major economies edge toward reopening. S&P poised for its highest close since March 10th as financial companies lead gains after a surprisingly good earnings report from Deutsche Bank. Its American depository receipts are also advancing today. DB, the ticker there, up by 12.5%. Some of the other stories we're following: global confirmed cases have passed the 3 million mark, even as Italy reports the lowest levels of new coronavirus infections in 7 weeks and prepares to begin reopening. Research is also continuing at a rapid pace as drug developers race to come up with a treatment for coronavirus. Dr. Joshua Sharfstein is Vice Dean of the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health, and on the Bloomberg television this morning, he talked about what's showing promise and what isn't.
Hydroxychloroquine has not been being shown to work in different studies and may even be dangerous, although the most high-quality studies really haven't been published for that. And there's also a whole bunch of studies coming out on remdesivir, which is an antiviral drug, that have yet to come out.
The Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health is supported by Michael R. Bloomberg, founder of Bloomberg LP and Bloomberg Philanthropies. Lenders worldwide have pledged more than $31 billion in loans to major airlines, scrambling to line up funding as the coronavirus pandemic forces them to ground their fleets. Mixed day for a lot of U.S. airline stocks today. For example, UAL up 0.2%, American down 1.7%, Delta up 0.9%, Southwest up by 1.3%. 10-year yield 0.65%, gold down 0.8%, West Texas Intermediate crude plunging 22%, now $13.18 a barrel. I'm Charlie Pellet. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thanks a lot. You are listening to Bloomberg Business Week right here on Bloomberg Radio.
Bottoms up. Sounds familiar.
The voice sounds familiar.
As well it should.
Is that don't tell me. Is that David Lee Roth?
It is.
Oh, well done, Jason Kelly.
There we go. And is that when he was part of Van Halen?
It was.
All right, you go. Bottoms up, Dave Wilson. Happy Monday.
Exactly.
See, I got all jazzed up for the chart of the day, Carol. See, I was doing my little stretches and exercises.
Is he trying to tell us something bottoms up? Do you think he was
delivered?
Imbibing a little bit over the weekend?
No.
Okay.
You might think.
I'm just thinking. You know.
That's what David Lee Roth meant.
Yeah.
But that's not what Dave Wilson.
In any case, no, it's all about, sort of bottom up looking at the stock market and trying to figure out what it's signaling about the economy. It's an exercise that Jim Paulson did the other day. He's the chief investment strategist over Luthol Group. And among other things, he looked at some of these industry groups that are economically sensitive and that have been beaten up and said, you're starting to see a recovery in the shares, even though if you look at the economic indicators, there hasn't been one yet. And so what do you take away from that? In short, the way he sees it is that there's some optimism that what the economy is going through right now is going to reach its low point sooner rather than later. That's his take anyway. And in order to show what he was looking at, because, otherwise it would have been too messy a chart, I just looked back at the last 3 weeks. for 3 industry groups within the S&P 500: restaurants, auto stocks, and home builders. And what you find out is in each case, each of these groups were up more than the S&P 500 over that time span. So, you're seeing a recovery in each of them. The best performer out of the 3 was up something like 28%, and that would be the home builders. And the other 2 were up about 20% as well at a time when the S&P 500 was up 14%. So, it's not only that you're seeing a rebound, but you're also seeing something more than just groups participating in the market recovery. So, that's the sort of thing that Paulson's looking at and saying, well, maybe it's not going to get dragged out forever, at least based on what the stock market is telling us and the way he sees it. The information, in essence, that you get out of that, it's a bit more timely than what you'll find elsewhere, looking at economic indicators and so on. So if you want to know more, folks, send me an email. I'll get you the chart, the explanation that goes with it, and everything I do going forward. The email address is dwilson@bloomberg.net. That's dwilson@bloomberg.net.
Jason mentioned to Dave, you were looking at the NASDAQ. Yeah.
So, Dave, I'm sure you've noticed this already. And on a big tech week, tech earnings week, the NASDAQ, as of right this moment, if I'm reading my Bloomberg correctly, which I think I am, NASDAQ is only down 2.5% for the year.
Yeah, I mean, and if you look at the Nasdaq 100, biggest companies, and those are the ones that everybody's watching out for when it comes to the earnings, you look where the Nasdaq 100 is, it's up for the year, 1.3%, which kind of speaks to the point in a sense. Bigger companies kind of leading the way, and that's really been a concern not only in the current bear market, but also in the bull market that preceded it. So, there's a consistency there, and you take a look at either of those indicators relative to what the S&P 500 is doing at this point.
It's down.
It's still down
almost 11%.
Yeah, and the Dow's down about 15%, right? So that's pretty dramatic, that difference.
It is, and it shows you how much is at stake, as we start getting all these numbers this week. I mean, it really is going to be perhaps a make or break week in that sense, given just the size of the companies, their importance to the market, starting with Alphabet and working from there, the owner of Google. And, of course, we have the issues about whether these companies are going to be able to maintain the kind of advertising that has really bolstered their business over the years. Snapchat's parent Snap was out with results last week that went over well on that score. But the question is, once you get to, Google and Facebook, do you really see the same picture?
Right. Yeah. Is it as broad-based? Absolutely. All right, Dave Wilson, we'll talk to you in less than 30 minutes' time for your stock of the day. That's, of course, Dave Wilson with his chart of the day. Very proud of myself for that David Lee Roth poll. Just saying.
I'm so proud of you. And so glad you're proud of yourself,
Jason. That seems sarcastic.
That
doesn't seem sincere. Let's get to Bob Moon, always sincere, with our World of National Headlines. Hi, Bob.
I detected no little Jack Horner there at all. Don't bother tuning in for the regular nightly briefing from the White House Coronavirus Task Force. There won't be one this afternoon. White House Press Secretary Kayleigh McEnany tells Fox News the task force will resume briefings later in the week. She spoke of these events not as a way to provide important health information to the public, but as a way to spotlight the president.
We're looking at different ways to showcase this president leading. The briefing's a key component of that. We will have briefings this week.
Without exception, Trump has attacked Democrats and reporters and sought to gain political points at all the daily pandemic status briefings after he was widely criticized and ridiculed for promoting his own unorthodox hunches for treating the virus. He decided during the weekend that the briefings had lost their usefulness because the media did everything possible, he said, to disparage them. The Navy hospital docked in Manhattan will depart this week. Bloomberg's Michael Barr reports.
It arrived late last month to help relieve New York City hospitals dealing with COVID-19 cases. Now, barring bad weather, the Navy is planning a Thursday departure for the USNS Comfort. During its time in New York, the medical crew of the Comfort treated 182 patients, the last of which was discharged over the weekend. The workers are now breaking down the coronavirus ward and will then begin 14 days in isolation. Michael Barr, Bloomberg Radio.
And just to clarify on that briefing story, President Trump will hold a press availability today as he meets with chief executives and industry leaders, but the White House Coronavirus Task Force will not be holding a briefing. Global News 24 hours a day on air. And on Quick Take by Bloomberg, I'm Bob Moon.
It just sounds
Bob,
funny,
thank
right?
you.
To hear our producers be like, you doing the avocado Philly? Or?
Yeah, we're going to do the avocado fill. We're going to talk all about avocados. Listen.
This is so true. Can I tell you?
It is no secret.
Every time
you and
we
I
do
big fans
well,
avocados.
Going into this, but every time we do the supermarket, run and we're, ordering our groceries online, I'm like, you got avocados? And he's like, yeah. I'm like, you got a lot of avocados on that list? I mean, it's just the one thing that I think as we are stuck home and are tired of like packaged goods to some extent or what have you. And we've got a lot of fresh food, but it's just like, let's have an avocado. It's just stand down.
I was eating this delicious chickpea dish that my wife makes last night, and I started to dice up some avocados into it. And she's like, are you putting avocados in that? And I said, why wouldn't I? There's almost nothing I wouldn't put avocados in. I love avocados. It's good for you.
I know.
Your favorite food, I think, that I've ever seen you consume.
You know me, I travel far for my...
Is the avocado toast at, what's the, Frog Hollow Farms?
Yes.
Is that what it's called in
Yes.
San Francisco?
They also have great olive oil. Like the whole combination, it's just perfect. It's not, is it not perfect?
It's perfect. It's perfect. And you make a strong point to order it, even for like the car ride from the airport. It's like, all right, we got to end this meeting 10 minutes early because we got to go to Frog Hollow Farm.
You should see the logistics that we have in making sure we can get that.
Exactly. It's like, are we focused on the show? No, we're focused on avocado toast right now.
So as a result, avocado prices, they're up 60% from early March. And what's interestingly, conversely, butter's tumbling because of the loss of restaurant demand. So this is impacting, right? The virus is impacting.
I thought we are consuming huge amounts of butter because of all the baking.
Oh, yeah, you told me about that.
Literally like pounds and pounds we're getting. So that's one of the other staples that every time we go to the store, it's like avocados, butter, apples. We're eating a lot of apples and steel-cut oatmeal. That's my go-to.
A lot of cheese too. A lot of like hard cheese and stuff. We're doing a little bit of cookies too and chocolate. I gotta say, there's like those chocolate runs, man.
Yeah.
All right, everybody.
It happens.
Avocado Phil, gotta love it.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. We've got 13 minutes to go ahead of the closing bell with the Dow, the S&P, and Nasdaq at or near session highs. Let's head right over to the First Word breaking news desk for today's afternoon call. Here he is, Bill Maloney.
And good afternoon, Charlie. That's right. U.S. stocks with a bid again today with the Dow currently up 416 points. S&P's up 49. Nasdaq climbs by 112. The U.S. 10-year yield at 0.66%. WTI crude futures plunged 23%. Gold is down 15, and small caps rise 4.9%. Transports jumped 269 points, and the VIX is down by 8%. Leaders to the upside in the Dow, Disney, 3M, and J.P. Morgan. Modest losses in Walmart, Procter & Gamble, and Microsoft. In other news, Boeing says they are staying current on payments to suppliers. Also said it will be years before the company's dividends returned. And the CEO said he is still confident in the 737 MAX. Wrapping things up at 5 Networks and Keurig Dr. Pepper report after the bell. Live from the First Word breaking news desk, I'm Bill Maloney. Charlie?
Okay, we thank you very much, Bill. And to hear live breaking news over your Bloomberg-type squawk, SQUAWK on your terminal. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
I'm driving in my car. I turn on the radio.
How about you let me drive?
Oh, no.
Who's gonna drive you home?
Honey, please, I'll do the driving.
Drive on.
Excuse me, I want to drive.
Just drive, baby.
It's the question that drives us.
This is the Drive to the Close.
That funky music will drive us till the dawn.
On Bloomberg Radio.
All right, just got about 11 minutes left in today's trading session. It is time for the Drive to the Close. Ron Carson is back with us, co-founder, CEO of the wealth advisor Carson Group. They are based in Omaha, Nebraska, and that's exactly where we find Ron on this Monday. Ron, good to have you back with us. How are you doing? Tell us a little bit about life in Omaha right now.
Well, Carol, it's great to be back with you, and my heart goes out to everybody in New York. I know you guys have been hit especially hard. I'm going on. I had 2 knee surgeries leading into this, so I'm week 14 working from home. But I would say the company's functioning well, and then personally, me and my family are doing really well.
Well, I guess that was in part well-timed. I don't know if knee surgery is ever totally well-timed, Ron, but at least it sets you up to be in the right position. What's the general sentiment around, sort of folks that you talk to there in Nebraska? I mean, we're always trying to take the temperature, especially given this, I keep using this term, sort of this checkerboard approach. It feels like that we're going to take state by state in terms of reopening. What's the sense there among your neighbors?
What I like about Omaha and maybe Nebraska in general is we're a bunch of rule followers. So, for the most part, everybody's out. You're walking down the sidewalk. They go clear on the other side of the street. And it's like it's not 50 feet, it's 6 feet. So they're very much observing it, the rules. On the flip side, financially, though, a bit of concern for me is, a major case of FOMO, everybody's fear of missing out, on this reflation that we've had because, people either had cash or raised some cash, during the decline. And I'd say the rule following, but having a lot of time to sit around and go, gosh, I wish I would have put a lot more money in, at the quote unquote, market low that we've had so far.
Yeah, I do wonder if we're going to all look back at this. I mean, Jason and I have had a lot of conversations. I've had these conversations at home that, you knew logically that certain companies were not going to come undone and that things were going to bounce back. It's just a matter of timing. And so for stocks that had run up, just nonstop, all of a sudden share prices were essentially on sale.
They were, and some really good companies. And this is where I think, for quite a run, we've had passive, just buy the market, not have to think about it, has been the place to be. Now it's going to be surgical. It's going to be active because if you go back during the financial crisis, some companies became much stronger. Some companies gained considerable market share. I mean, look at Zoom, look at Amazon, look at these companies that are, actually are unfortunately, they benefit from this, tragedy hitting our country. But, the fact is that some of this demand is permanent, but most of the demand is just going to be deferred to a future date. And then other companies are going to pick up the business from those companies and unfortunately aren't going to survive.
And so, Ron, talk to us about oil because, that's a story that I feel like, again, maybe plays a little bit differently depending on where you are in the country, depending on what your business is and how you rely on it or don't rely on it. We spent so much time, I think, in the past thinking about it vis-a-vis gasoline prices. That seems like less of an issue, although obviously demand plays into the equation here. But how do you think about oil from an investment perspective?
Yeah, that's the number one topic, right? When we had oil, especially had, the May futures trade negative, which I never fathomed I've been in this business nearly 40 years could ever happen. Now everybody's looking around saying this must be the buy of a lifetime, and I wouldn't be so sure. I mean, we've got it's beneficial to the consumer because we have lower energy prices. My CIO just told me he was driving back from Chicago, paid $1.18. Here in Omaha, it's about $1.40 a gallon. That's tremendous stimulus, right? At least we're not spending as much, and ultimately that should be a tailwind for the economy. From an investor standpoint, you just saw, Diamond Offshore filed for bankruptcy. There's going to be a lot of other bankruptcies out there, and this is the major question: is who can survive and how long will it be? And this is where you need to be surgical about the companies that you invest in. But I think the June contract, may trade as down as much as the May contract did, especially if oil falls below 10. They increased the margin calls from I think it was either 6 or 650 a barrel all the way up to 10. So if we see the contract trade below 13, watch out. And you've heard about we don't have nearly the demand, and so we don't have a lot of places to put this oil, and that's what's causing this downdraft.
Crunch, yeah.
Ron, is it time for all of us to accept that, we went from, when it came to the energy markets, oil specifically, that of course oil is a great investment play. We're, even though we talk about alternative fuels, it's still such a small percentage. And the world is growing, and you have developing economies like China just coming online increasingly. So, we've gone from that to, oh my God, we have just too much of this stuff. And we've got market imbalances. You've got demand destruction as well as too much supply. Have we come to the end of the oil story? Or are we getting closer to it?
I think you hit the nail on the head, Carol. I think we're coming closer. There's a university in Palo Alto called Singularity University, and it's a place where business CEOs around the world can come for a week and learn about, what are some of the trends people aren't talking about. And a year ago, they were talking about the fact that they think there's going to be more than $1 trillion of carbon unused because of the alternative, energy plays that are out there. And I believe that, two things are happening. We're shifting to these alternative energy sources, which are falling dramatically. And the next generation cares about the amount of emissions we put out far more than any other generation we've had. So they're very, very conscious, willing even to spend a little more. So I think the fact that we saw, oil nearly hit $150 a barrel and then all the way down to a negative number. But I just don't think it's going to be the play in the future that it's been in the past.
And just about 20 seconds here. The Fed, excited, worried about Jay Powell this week?
Not worried at all. I think the Fed's done a masterful job. In 2008, Treasury and the Fed really weren't on top of it. They are this time. The only thing we think is they may expand some of the programs, which would be positive for the economy.
All right. Well, be well. We really appreciate it. Ron Conway out there in Omaha. Good to catch up with you. Good luck with those new knees. And stay safe.
Right?
It sounds like your neighbors are doing a good job with the social distancing. You're listening to Bloomberg Business Week. Coming up, the close. This is Bloomberg Business Week.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. Sound of the closing bell at the New York Stock Exchange as we wrap up trading on this Monday. That is the folks from the New York Stock Exchange all alone there ringing the closing bell. Kevin Fitzgibbons, Chief Security Officer. Stocks climbed as major economies edged toward reopening. Policymakers in Japan and Europe sought to reduce pressure on credit markets. The dollar weakened. Oil took another dive, a topic we were just talking about. West Texas Intermediate crude plunging today by 23%, down almost $4 a barrel at $12.99. S&P 500 index having its highest close since March 10th as financial companies led gains after a surprisingly good earnings report from Deutsche Bank and amid continued talk of easing the lockdowns that have helped contain the coronavirus. As for where to invest in this market, David Lebovitz is global market strategist at JP Morgan Investment Management.
We don't think it's appropriate at this juncture for clients to run to one side of the boat or the other. We want to focus on companies with low levels of leverage, solid profit margins, but we don't want to completely abandon beta because as this market trends higher, we want to be able to participate. So staying pretty balanced at the current juncture and really focusing on the fundamentals and the microeconomics at the portfolio level.
And this headline from the Bloomberg Professional Service, U.S. COVID-19 cases up 2.3%. That is the slowest pace this month. Boeing says 52% of its shareholders at the company's annual meeting voted to require the company to appoint an independent chairman. In a virtual gathering, its CEO David Calhoun said it will be, quote, years before dividend payments resume. Boeing also says travel won't return to 2019 levels for 2 to 3 years. Boeing shares lower today by 0.4%. UPS going to be using drones to fill prescriptions for residents of the Villages in Florida, one of the country's biggest retirement communities amid the lockdown. UPS shares trading little changed today. Again, recapping, equities higher, S&P up 41, up 1.5%. I'm Charlie Pellet.
Your next move will be your last.
Nobody move a muscle.
Damn, Sippy, you got some moves.
And I'm moving on from town to town.
Time is money. Let's go. Come on, move it.
Shake it up. Shake it up.
Bloomberg Business Week. Movers and Shakers with Carol Masser and Jason Kelly on Bloomberg Radio.
All right, time to take a look at some of the stocks on the move. It's going to be a big week for earnings and, of course, that Fed meeting. So a lot for investors to digest and, of course, an ongoing update on the virus situation around the country. All right, so big picture today. You heard Dave talk about it, Charlie talk about it. Broad-based rally. So 443 names in the S&P 500 higher today, including a lot of retail names. We'll get to that in just a moment. 62 lower. And Jason, if I take a peek at your major industry groups in the S&P 500, there are 11 of them. All of them were up. The worst performer was consumer staples, just up about 0.5% for the day. Top of the pack, financials, up 3.8%. Real estate was up more than 3%. Materials were up 2.8%. So, yeah, some enthusiasm. What's interesting, and I think a lot of it has to do with, like you said, you kicked off the show saying green on the screen around the globe. So
all
I think
the way down.
Right. Optimism, right?
Yeah.
As we start to think about reopening, taking steps to actually reopen the economy.
Well, and that is why, I mean, you don't have to be a genius to figure this out. That's why your top 4 performers on the S&P today, retail.
I know.
Pretty amazing, right? So
Yeah.
you look at Kohl's, PVH, Nordstrom, Gap. 1, 2, 3, 4. Bing, 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 bing.
And these guys have been really beaten up, understandably. Their stores have been shut.
Totally.
People can't go. And so a
And
retail
they were
sector-
struggling before,
Yes.
right? Many of them were
Yes.
struggling before. Maybe Kohl's a little less so, but I'm just taking a look at the Gap right now. I mean, the Gap is down 56% this year.
Yeah. Well, think about it. They've lost a month
Yeah.
of shopping. And even though people have been doing stuff online, it's not the same. It's not the same of walking into a store. And I do wonder, listening to conversations on our air and throughout the day on Bloomberg Radio, is, what companies make it to the other side, and whether
Yeah.
some of those companies that were already in a weak state, particularly in the retail sector, just don't make it through.
Yeah,
I don't know.
I agree with you. We're going to put a lot of that to the CEO of Joanne Stores. We're going to catch up with him during our 5 o'clock hour, back half of our 5 o'clock hour. They're obviously doing a lot of work. It's a different sort of story for them because they're doing some work, maybe not making a lot of money on it, but doing some work for frontline workers, really important work, obviously. But their stores are closed and nobody is stopping by to work on a quilt.
Right, and it's different. You go into a store and you go in maybe thinking to buy one thing, and then you buy
Right.
other things. That's just the way it works. So you mentioned Kohl's was up 17, almost 18%. PVH, home of many brands, up more than 15%. Nordstrom up almost 14%, and as you said, the Gap is up 13%. Still down a lot for the year, but interesting to see those moves. What else you got?
So here's another thing, and Charlie mentioned this, I think, earlier in the broadcast. I'm laughing only because this is not a name that we talked about in any sort of positive way over the last, 2 years.
How many years?
Deutsche Bank.
I know.
Incredible. I mean, Elisa Martinuzzi, actually, her column on the Bloomberg, it's one of the most read, says it all. Deutsche Bank enjoys a rare day in the sun. It's still on the ADRs, the American Depository Receipts, it's still a less than $7 stock, but up, let me just get a percentage gain here, and you mentioned the financials earlier, up 12%, better than 12% today.
Perspective, right? Perspective.
Yeah, perspective.
So they had a rare profit. And so it's just kind of interesting. They do warn of a lot of loan defaults, but nonetheless, you're right. This is a company I feel like in the last couple years easily, it's just been one thing after another in terms of their problems.
And let's also keep in mind when you think about who's gotten good reviews from a country perspective in handling the coronavirus. Germany. Angela Merkel. Don't sleep on Merkel. Like she's
she's had talk about resurgence. She's in a resurgence, right? She was planning to retire, right?
And her successor pieced out. AKK.
Pieced out.
Anyway,
yeah, that's exactly what they did.
Keep it. I don't know what's German for pieced out. In any case, taking a look at the VIX volatility, not surprisingly down almost 8%, closing at 33.10. This is Bloomberg.
All right, Dave, you're up.
Hi, my name is Dave.
Wilson, what are you? Wilson!
Just what do you think you're doing, Dave?
We're going for a price on Wilson.
Open up the door, it's Dave! Who? Dave!
Hey, Mr. Wilson!
Hey, Mr. Wilson, Dave Wilson, back with us with your stock of the day. What you looking at?
CNX Resources, Jason. They produce natural gas from shale fields in the eastern U.S. along with methane from coal beds in their home state of Pennsylvania. Now, CNX used to belong to a coal producer, Consol Energy. The businesses went their separate ways in late 2017 thanks to a spinoff. The coal business kept the Consol name, while the gas business kept the ticker, CNX. Now, shares of CNX set a post-spinoff low 7 weeks ago when they were down 52% for the year. Since then, they've rallied far enough to become the best-performing energy company in S&P's benchmark U.S. indexes. We're talking the S&P 500, mid-cap 400, small-cap 600. Natural gas is stabilized at a time when crude oil, well, it's just been tumbling. And CNX's rebound gained momentum after first quarter results came out today. Profit before accounting charges was more than triple analyst average estimate, the Bloomberg survey. Revenue topped the average projection, and the company laid out a 7-year plan to increase cash flow, even with production cuts this year. All this left CNX's shares to their highest price in about 15 months. They closed with a gain of more than 12%, and for the year, they're up almost 46%.
Yeah, that's a big pop, man.
Yeah.
Big pop for any stock, especially for an energy stock. But the focus has really been on the gas business. And companies like this, Cabot Oil and Gas is another example. Even though they have oil in the name, it's really a gas
But
company.
I thought we have a glut, too, when it comes to nat gas as well.
Well, that may well be true, but you haven't seen prices fall out of bed the way that you have with oil. And that makes all the difference in the world for these stocks.
Well, and I
but
feel
as
like...
you say...
Oh, sorry.
I was going to say, just as you say, sort of amazing given that Ron Conway was talking about energy names going bankrupt.
Yeah, I think if we let the markets kind of do their thing, there's going to be some natural selection, no doubt about it. And we know nat gas year after year has seen a lot of pressure also, right? So maybe some of that fluff and excess is already out of the prices. All right, Dave Wilson, always love checking in with you. Dave Wilson with his stock of the day. Let's get back to World and National News.
Let's do it. Ed Baxter is there while, Carol Massar quotes, it sounds like Adam Smith, invisible hand of the market, Ed.
That economics degree, Ed, occasionally comes in
Sometimes
handy.
it creeps up. It creeps up, Ed.
Sounded good. The functionality of the Trump White House is getting attention today, guys, as the decision on whether or not to have briefings brings some mixed messages. Over the weekend, the president tweeted the task force briefings are useless. Early today, his press secretary, Kayleigh McEnany, said there'd be no media meetings. And then
today, we're not tracking a briefing. There will be a press avail later this afternoon with CEOs that the president's meeting with. There will be briefings throughout other portions of the week, but these briefings are excellent. They're a way for the president to speak directly to the American people.
So the latest sum total is a media availability at the top of the hour. And she says to show that the president is leading. This is the White House pivots away from scientific briefings for the president to economic. New York Governor Andrew Cuomo says some parts of the state may unpause after May 15th.
We're going to turn the valve on reopening, turn it a little bit, start to reopen, and then you watch the dials.
So he says trace monitoring the theme in California as Governor Gavin Newsom expressed concern over several people spotted on Southern California beaches.
Weeks, not months, if the data continues to be as stable as it has been over the course of the last few weeks. The only thing that can stop that is more images like we saw over this weekend.
And those images were people flocking to the beach. In San Francisco, I'm Ed Baxter.
All right, Ed, thank you so much. A reminder of a conversation we had earlier, Carol, about, people just wanting to get out. And speaking of which, closer to home, New York City talking about closing 40 miles of streets. Basically, space it out. Just, give people a little more room to social distance, sort of like Ron Conway and his neighbors out there in Omaha. You say 6, I'll give you 50. I'm not sure you can get 50 feet anywhere in New York City. But in all seriousness, I mean, it is interesting to think about this, and it does seem
wild.
like something.
It's wild. If you think about how much, and I think they've seen some success. And listen, I wonder what California's thinking too, because people need to get out. And we increasingly saw that people are even willing to take a risk because they just have had it being inside, right? And it's our natural inclination. Like my daughter and I were even saying, when it's raining, it's like, I'm okay. I'm kind of, hunkering down, kind of cozy in my house. When it's sunny and gorgeous, you just want to be outside. And I was thinking about this, Jason, closing down streets. I do wonder, I understand why we're doing it, to let people have some space to get out so that they can get fresh air, be outside, but are not on top of each other. But I do wonder if this facilitates the closing of streets.
More permanently?
Down the road. Yeah, more permanently. And we've seen some of that start to happen in New York, but it's slow, and just also reducing car populations in the city. I just wonder if this is going to be a big step towards some of that.
It could be.
I don't know.
We've certainly seen the magazine's written quite a bit about that over the course of the last couple years, and obviously through the Bloomberg Green Initiative, it's something that folks have written a lot about. And as you say, there are parts of New York City down Herald Square, down near Macy's flagship store in Times Square, obviously a lot more pedestrian friendly, and you do wonder, I mean, it is a way to dramatically reshape a city, especially a dense city like New York. And if you think about a scenario in which more people are going to be walking, riding bikes versus getting on the subway, this could be something that gets us there. All right, you're listening to Bloomberg Business Week.